The Innkeeper by Life Sketcher. Chapter 61. Can't catch a break. The first shot hit the alpha directly in the face, but the alpha did not even flinch. The shot barely broke its skin, and after a couple of drops of blood the wound completely healed. Lex felt like cursing, but instead focused his fire on the other wolves behind the alpha while retreating. He had retreated only a few steps when he felt his body tense, his instinct screaming at him to dodge. Lex did not hesitate in throwing himself to the side, but he was still too slow. He felt something hit him on the chest, launching him off to the side. The air left his body and he puked all over the ground as soon as he landed. He did not let that stop him, however, as he reached into his bag and pulled out his last flashbang. He pressed the button on it and started running, or stumbling, away from the wolves. The 10-second delay seemed like infinity, and he kept shooting towards the wolves to try and keep them at a distance. When there were only a couple seconds left he threw the flashbang towards the alpha and bolted away. He heard a bang behind him, followed by the howling of wounded wolves. "Bloody hell," he exclaimed internally as he ran. He had no idea what had hit him, and he just realized that he had lost his grip on his short sword when he was hit. Fortunately the gun was still in his hand, but there was no way he could go back for the sword. Hopefully he bought himself a few. Lex felt his body tense and immediately rolled to the side, just in time to see a large object fly by where he was just running. He looked back and saw the alpha standing in the distance, launching some kind of air blast from its mouth towards him. Lex rolled again to dodge, and immediately aimed the heavy Harley towards the alpha. He tried to shoot it in the mouth, but he was too disoriented to aim properly and missed all his shots. "Bloody hell, give me a break," he screamed internally, and he threw himself behind a tree to break line of sight with the alpha, and kept running. "You have 20 bullets remaining. You should also drink a botlamdew in case you have internal injuries," said Mary, but stayed out of his sight to avoid distracting him. Immediately Lex bought a botlamdew mentally and drank it, ignoring the familiar taste. He was in trouble. Reloading his magazine took a couple of minutes. He needed to get somewhere he could hide for a few minutes. But how could the wolves give him any time? The few wolves left that had been accompanying the alpha ran in front of him, cutting off his escape path as the growling alpha slowly made its way towards him. Lex backed up against a tree once again, to keep the wolves from attacking him from his back, and focused on the alpha. "Never gonna wish for some more excitement ever again," he said to himself internally. His initial excitement for combat had worn off, but it wasn't fear that replaced it. He was filled with immense focus and determination. It would be a lie to say that he wasn't still nervous, but he had his nerves firmly in control. Right now he was in a tough situation, but not an impossible one. He already felt his body recovering, not to mention he was sure that his body armor had reduced the damage he had taken from the alpha's projectile attack. When it was about 15 feet away the alpha lurched at him, ready to bite his throat off, but Lex was also ready. In one fluid motion Lex raised the heavy Harley and shot one single bullet straight into its open maw. Before the shot even connected he'd already aimed the gun away, shooting continuously at the other wolves around him. The alpha was injured and it fell on the ground, but it was far from weak enough for Lex to take advantage. Lex bolted into the forest once again, his gun finally out of bullets. He removed the magazine and threw the empty one into his backpack, hoping the close proximity to the spirit tokens would work in refilling it while he took out the magazine with the iron-ranked low-caliber rounds. He really hoped he could find some time to rest. The recoil from these bullets was still too strong for him. "I think I hear the sound of running water," Mary exclaimed. "It could be a river. You coils use it to hide." "That way," she said, pointing Lex in the right direction. Panting heavily now, Lex forced himself to run where Mary pointed and hoped the wolves would give him some time. But the very next second an angry but somehow gargled howl from behind him let him know that the alpha had started the chase again. Lex grit his teeth and forced himself to run faster. Fortunately the river was close by, and Lex reached it quickly. Unfortunately, so was the chasing alpha, and its speed had picked up beyond anything it had shown before. Its speed really was too fast, and before Lex could aim his gun it was almost on top of him. Lex's body tensed again, and for the first time Lex felt like he was staring death right in the mouth. To be more specific, the open mouth of the wolf that was lunging towards his throat once again. For an instant time seemed to freeze and Lex's thoughts froze as well. He could only see the sharp and bloody teeth of the wolf, each one as big as one of Lex's fingers. He absolutely could not get bitten. Without planning or realizing, Lex raised his right arm defensively, blocking the wolf from reaching his throat. The angry alpha chomped down on his arm and Lex felt insane, unbelievable pain as he felt his muscles rip and his bones shatter. The boy and the wolf fell into the raging river, but even as their bodies were carried by the cold, rushing water they did not separate. Angry, incoherent and exhausted, Lex did the only thing he could think of. He fought against the force of the water to bring the gun up to where he assumed the wolf's eyes were and shot. The recoil hit him like a hammer, and threatened to tear the gun out of his arm, but he held on. The pain of his wound, the vertigo of being flung around like a rag doll by the water, the exhaustion of running and fighting all day threatened to knock him unconscious, but he fought to keep himself awake. The wolf, still biting into his arm, flailed its paws around in an attempt to find something to grab onto, to pull itself out of the water, but to no avail. Lex brought the gun to the wolf's skull and shot one more time, finally prying its jaw loose and separating the two. But Lex did not have any time to celebrate. The force of the river was beyond what he had anticipated, and he had absolutely no control over his body as it was rushed downriver. He moved his one good arm around to try and maneuver himself, but there was no luck. Just as he was beginning to lose hope, what little hope he had left, he felt something grab his leg and pull him aside. He felt a tinge of panic, and readied himself to shoot, but then he realized that he was being pulled out of the river. Hallelujah! It only took a few moments, but felt as if an eternity had passed by the time he was pulled out. He raised his head to see a giant turtle with a horn on its head staring fondly at him. "Silly humans, why are you always so helpless?" Lex heard a soft voice in his head, and almost chuckled despite his condition. "Stop chuckling and bandage your hand. You're losing a lot of blood, you'll bleed to death," told Mary, appearing above him. "Can't catch a break," he murmured to himself. Chapter 62. Oh dear. Taking a deep breath, Lex forced himself to sit up, a task that was monumental given how exhausted he was. Nonetheless, he pushed himself upright and holstered his gun before taking off his backpack to search for his mini medkit. The giant turtle watched him with great interest, as if he were watching a pet perform a trick. Lex withdrew the medkit and took out the gauze to wrap his hand with, but when he took a look at his right arm he was extremely alarmed. There weren't just a few bite holes like he was expecting, his entire right arm was disfigured and ripped in various places. In normal cases a wound like this would require major reconstruction surgery or even amputation. The recovery pod should be able to handle it when he gets back to the inn, but he had to make sure he didn't bleed to death before that. "That doesn't look like a wound from the river," the giant turtle spoke in Lex's head again, bringing its head closer to his arm for a look. "Oh dear, that does look really bad. Let me help you a bit." The grass from the ground started growing rapidly and started gently wrapping itself around his arm. Lex winced, a sharp pain shot through his entire body, but suddenly he felt a cooling sensation run through his right arm, which was followed by his entire arm going numb. Oh dear, this is very bad. This is very, very bad. Let me see what I have." The giant turtle withdrew its head into its shell and made a few mumbling noises, as if talking to itself. Then, unexpectedly, from its shell Lex started hearing the sound of various things being moved around, as if someone were rearranging stuff in a storeroom. Finally it brought its head out again with a large fruit hanging in its mouth. It brought the fruit over Lex's arm and crushed it, letting the juices fall on the cast made of leaves. The leaves greedily sucked all the juices without letting a single drop fall, but Lex felt no difference. His entire right arm was numb, but as long as the bleeding had stopped he was content. He'd let the recovery pod handle whatever the injury was. "How did you ever get yourself into so much trouble?" the turtle gently asked, sitting down in front of Lex. "I was being chased by a pack of wolves. They chased me from the road into the forest. I thought the roads were supposed to be safe." "Wolves? Oh dear, why would wolves be chasing you? No offense, but you don't look like you could feed even a couple of them." Lex looked at the harmless-looking giant turtle in front of him, and suddenly became slightly wary. It had saved him, and even helped him, but did it truly have no ulterior motives? Whether it did or did not, Lex was in a bad condition right now. He was in no shape to protect himself. He reached his left hand into his backpack and bought a golden key from the inn, pulling it out for the turtle to see. "They were chasing me because they wanted this piece of treasure I found." He held it up so the turtle could take a good look at it. "As thanks for saving me, I'd like to give it to you." The turtle looked strangely at the key, and for a moment seemed attracted to it, but as soon as the moment passed it returned to normal. "Oh dear little human, I don't want your treasure. I was only asking why you got in trouble. You humans are so interesting. You're always running around doing different things. All I ever do is tend to the forest. Meeting you humans adds a little color to my life." Lex was taken aback at the fact that the turtle resisted the temptation of the key. Based on his understanding it should be very attractive to anyone who sees it. But still, since he had already bought the key there was no point in wasting it. "No please, I insist. You should take it. If I keep it with me, the wolves will come back for me." The turtle was silent for a while and stared at him. "I know you were just saying that so I accept the gift." Oh dear. You are such a kind human. I suppose I can accept your treasure. But I have no use for treasures anyway. I only like to stay in the forest and take care of my plants." The turtle reached forward and picked the key up with its mouth before retracting its head back into its shell, placing the key somewhere in there. When its head came back out, the turtle was smiling. "Why don't you come with me? I will take you somewhere safe. The wolves won't find you there and you can eat some food. When you're feeling better you can leave. I know you humans don't like staying too long in the forest." Without waiting for Lex to reply, the turtle lifted Lex off the ground with its mouth and placed him gently on its shell. The turtle then lifted itself off the ground and slowly started making its way into the forest. It was still dark and Lex had lost his night vision glasses somewhere in the river, but his eyesight had acclimatized enough for him to be able to vaguely see around himself. This is free territory, no one can claim the land right next to the river. But right after this is my garden. I let the rabbits and owls live in my garden, and they take care of my things for me. It's a little trouble keeping the rabbits safe though, they're so mischievous. The turtle began telling Lex about the forest and the creatures that lived in it. The turtle seemed to have a good relationship with all of them, and treated all of them as children. Lex tried to keep listening, but found the turtle's voice carried a certain charm that was making him drowsy. Eventually he could not help himself and dozed off. The turtle, as if unaware, kept talking as it slowly made its way deeper into the forest. Eventually it reached a treehouse built on a large oak tree and lifted Lex up, placing him inside one of the rooms through a window. Then the turtle continued its stroll through the woods, still softly talking even with no one around. Lex slept soundly through the night and woke up the following noon to the sound of a notification from the inn. Quest update, quest complete. The host has helped the carrier of the will of Nibiru complete her task. The host's reward is being calculated. Quest completed in 26 hours. Host influenced the carrier's personality. Host has influenced certain events, affecting the trajectory of Nibiru's development. Reward rank, B+. Reward, Mystery Trials. 10,000 MP. Lex was pleasantly surprised, the quest was already completed. To be honest, he never doubted that Tiffany would be safe. She carried the will of the entire planet. Although Lex did not know what that exactly meant, he could at least guess that she was extremely lucky. The way she had escaped her pursuers when she was alone was already very telling, not to mention the fact that Lex teleported directly in her path when he reached the planet. He was sure that this was by no means a coincidence. Still, he wondered how she was able to complete the quest so quickly. "Hey Mary, what are these mystery trails?" he asked, in a good mood. His right arm was still numb, and he was grateful for it as he assumed otherwise he would be in excruciating pain. The tiny floating assistant appeared before him, but she didn't immediately answer. She stared at the young man with a very serious look, as if contemplating something. "Lex, let me ask you a question. Why did you fight the wolves?" "Huh?" "Because I was confident in myself, not to mention all the preparations I made beforehand." "Didn't everything turn out fine?" "No, based on your personality you would never take such a huge risk like that. Since you've gotten the inn, your first priority has always been protecting yourself. Your cultivation is based on defense and you've even registered for self-defense lessons instead of direct combat training. Taking such a huge risk doesn't match your habits." Lex was stunned. What she said did make sense, but he was free to decide to do things differently whenever he wanted. Just because he did things a certain way previously didn't mean he couldn't do them differently in the future. "I have a feeling, but it's best to be sure." "Why don't you check your status first, just to be sure?" Lex shrugged and pulled up his status. Name, Lex Williams. Age, 23. Sex, male. Cultivation level, regal embrace body tempering stage 1. Health, suboptimal, enlarged brain tumor, crippled right hand, bruised torso, bruised legs. Midnight points, 17,961. Midnight in level, 3. Inventory, bathroom slippers, self-defense butter knife, host attire. When Lex saw the tab about his health he froze. He was not concerned about the hand or his body, the recovery pod could take care of that. He was focused on the part that said enlarged brain tumor. It had grown. Chapter 63 Mystery Trials. Name, Lex Williams. Age, 23. Sex, male. Cultivation level, regal embrace body tempering stage 1. Health, suboptimal, enlarged brain tumor, crippled right hand, bruised torso, bruised legs. Midnight points, 17,961. Midnight in level, 3. Inventory, bathroom slippers, self-defense butter knife, host attire. After recovering from his shock, Lex focused on his health tab for more details. Health. Enlarged brain tumor. After growing a certain amount, it has started affecting the host's decision-making capabilities. It may result in headaches, blackouts, mood swings, impaired decision-making, memory loss and more. "It says my brain tumor has grown and will affect my decision-making process," Lex told Mary seriously. "Is this what you thought when you told me to check my status?" "It's what I was afraid of. This might be an inadvertent effect of the first procedure whilst cultivating regal embrace, which causes all your bodily functions to become more optimized. It even optimized the growth of your tumor. The problem should still be solved once you complete all 4 procedures, but just to be on the safe side you should do your best to make sure you cultivate as quickly as possible. Lex tensed up in frustration, but after a few moments let out a sigh and relaxed. There was no point dwelling on things he could not affect. He would focus on other things. So what's this mystery trial? He asked again. It's an upgrade for the inn. Guests can enter and undergo a trial based on their cultivation as well as their personalities. The mystery in its name comes from the fact that no one can know what kind of trial they will encounter. So a soldier or someone who enjoys fighting will have a combat trial, but someone who likes carpentry will have a trial based on building or fixing something. The trial allows you to discover your flaws and grow your skills, and if you succeed then there are even small prizes. The prizes however are only a minor focus, and the growth of your skills and abilities is the real focus of the mystery trials. Lex and Mary kept talking, as Lex was in no mood to explore the planet further and was simply waiting till he could return to the inn. Hopefully it won't be much longer. Hugo Laurent left his room, and for the first time in many years felt a sense of contentment. He had reached the peak foundation realm and even stabilized his cultivation in only a few days. For the first time in years he saw hope in his future. Although far off, his cultivation was going smoothly enough now that he imagined that he would be able to enter Golden Core sometime in the future. Once that happened, even if the Bentham family could not help him find his enemies, he would have enough influence to find out on his own. A part of him wanted to continue cultivating in this place, but his soul contract mildly influenced him to let him know that he should either continue investigating or return to Old Man Will with his information as quickly as possible. Still he was content with his gains. He was planning on visiting the gift shop once and then returning to Earth, but as soon as he ventured outside he noticed that the area surrounding the inn seemed to have changed. Not only did it seem bigger and fuller, but a few hills appeared in the distance. He went to Gerard to ask about it, and was pleasantly surprised to discover that a meditation room had been built on the hills in the distance, which aided one in cultivation. Still, as much as he wanted to go test out the new addition, his soul contract kept reminding him to focus on what was important. He went directly to the gift shop and carefully went through all the items, memorizing their effects. He only bought a bottle of Bottlum's Dew however, as he assumed that it could be useful to the old man. When he received it in card form he was extremely shocked and impressed. If he could learn how to store items in cards it would be immensely useful to him. With that done, Hugo left the building to explore the rest of the inn. He saw a new guest sitting in the garden, a young girl. At first Hugo was tempted to go talk to her, but then remembering that he was armed to the teeth he thought it might not be such a good idea. He explored the grounds and then ventured towards the hills. When he finally reached the meditation room he took his time to admire it, but ultimately resisted his urge to venture in. Making sure he had seen everything at least once and remembered all the details, he summoned Gerard and asked him if the innkeeper was available. He wanted to say his farewell before leaving, but unfortunately was told that the innkeeper was away on some business. With nothing left to do, he thought about returning, the way Gerard told him he could leave, and felt himself being transported away. Slowly his surroundings faded away and he found himself back in the hall in Will's house. He found a couple people waiting for him in the room, and as soon as he appeared they rushed to him to ensure that he was all right. After making sure that he was hurt anywhere, one of the staff members ran off to report to Will while the other led Hugo to a clinic. Even though he said he was unhurt, tests needed to be conducted to be sure. A team of doctors was ready waiting for him when he arrived. They took blood samples, conducted X-rays, MRIs, eyesight tests, psychological tests to determine his mental state and many more. Hugo went along with all these as he had already been through them once before he ventured to the inn, so that the doctors would have his baseline. Eventually, while he was still being tested, Will was brought into the room on a wheelchair. His skin had paled even beyond what it was before, and he looked incredibly weak. He was wearing an oxygen mask and it was clear that his situation had deteriorated drastically while Hugo was gone. This could also explain why his soul contract had been prompting him to hurry so much lately. The old man didn't speak, but he looked at the mercenary with hopeful eyes. "I believe you'll be very happy to hear what I have to report," Hugo told the old man as he kneeled before him. He handed the old man the golden key he had received when he returned from the inn, and began his tale. Chapter 64 Spirit Energy Poisoning. It only took a few more hours, but the connection to Nibiru was complete. Lex did not wait any longer and immediately chose to return to the inn. He had a few things he wanted to do, but the first and foremost was recovering. When went to the recovery room he found that Marlowe was still in his chamber, eating up his MP, not any better than before. Well, technically his vitality and spirit had recovered a lot, but was not fully healed. It seemed like it would take much longer than Lex guessed to heal the man. It could be because of the recovery room's low level and Marlowe's high cultivation, but Lex paid no mind to that for now. Without hesitation he lay himself down in a recovery pod and allowed the healing process for his arm to begin. "Hey Mary, how come the recovery room or recovery pod can't fix my tumor?" he asked mentally. While they both have strong healing capabilities, they only provide basic healing. There are many kinds of wounds that they cannot heal. Your tumor, for example, is something that needs to be removed from your body, so it does not come under the purview of this kind of healing. Similar to how they could not directly remove the poison from Helen's body, or the zombie mutagen from Marlowe. Once you start dealing with higher-leveled cultivators, their injuries will carry a hostile spirit energy, which is again not something these rooms can heal. For something like that you would have to look out for talented doctors or healers across the universe and hire them. In that case, the benefits the inn provides will improve their inherent capabilities, but can never replace them. Hiring such people will elevate the services you can provide and increase the prestige of the inn as well. Lex nodded, understanding that hiring a worthy staff was an important part of running the inn. Lex closed his eyes and allowed himself to fall asleep while his hand was being fixed. At some point the numb feeling had faded, but instead of pain Lex felt hollow and drained. He was too afraid to remove his grass bandages to actually look at the condition of his hand, but fortunately it would not be a concern much longer. A few hours later he was woken up to the notification that his hand had been fixed. He jumped out of the pod and squeezed the fingers on his right hand, feeling his strength. It still felt a little tired, but at least he was better now. Then another problem occurred to him. The recovery pods were right in the recovery room, and anyone could see who was being healed. If a customer ever saw him recovering it would mar his image. He needed to make a few changes, to keep the privacy of his customers as well. For example, Alexander had seen Marlowe and recognized him. That was all well, but what if the next person to recognize him was not on friendly terms? He went into the design interface and began making changes. Each pod was put in an individual room, the small change costing him 200 MP. While he was making changes, he might as well add the mystery trail as well. While all the additions he'd made to the inn so far were far away from the main building, he decided to add the mystery trail close to it. He flew to the back of the inn's building and chose a suitable place 500 meters away. When he selected the spot for the mystery trail, a mound of earth rose up from the ground 15 meters high and 10 meters in diameter. A large, metallic double-faced door was fixed on the side of the mound facing the inn. The door gave off an ancient feeling, as if it had withstood the flow of time for eons, undisturbed and unaffected. Lex frowned a little, and used the interface to make the mound of earth a little neater, and then chose to grow some grass over it. He didn't understand why the door had to be connected to the mound, but he could not remove it. "How much does the mystery trial cost?" he asked. He had to decide how much to charge his guests. For any guest who has used any of the inn's services, the first entry is free and costs you nothing either. Each consecutive use will cost you 500 MP. The mystery trial is unique, and you will not be able to buy more of those from the inn in the future. Its level is also linked to the level of the inn, so as the level of the inn increases the trial will give better feedback to its users as well as better rewards. For those whose trials include combat, if they die in the trial they won't actually die in real life, so that is an added benefit for those who want to train in combat. "I understand," he said, turning his attention to the next matter. From Nibiru he had brought back a bunch of seeds. Although he was sure many or all of them may have died tussling about in his backpack while he fought, this might be a good time to set up the greenhouse. There was one catch however. While he was not planting anything too precious right now, he wanted to keep the greenhouse somewhere secure so that guests would not barge in. What if they stole or damaged his goods? He was planning on using or selling whatever he grew, he could not afford to leave them out in the open. Before he could make any decisions however, he felt someone using a golden key to enter the inn. Lex smiled, made sure he looked presentable, and appeared at the entrance of the inn awaiting his new guest. From a flash of light 2 guests appeared, and Lex was surprised to see a familiar face. But before Lex could greet the guest he came to a horrible, awkward realization. He was standing at the entrance of the inn, right at the end of the stairs that led up to the inn. His familiar guest, Hugo Laurent, was standing at the foot of the staircase. The problem was, in front of Hugo the second guest was sitting in a wheelchair with no way up the stairs. This was also when Lex realized that most of his guest rooms were above the ground floor and a person in a wheelchair would have no way of getting to them. It was a good thing that the host attire kept his image calm and presentable, otherwise his guests would be exposed to the visage of him blushing in embarrassment. Still, Lex recovered quickly. Before Hugo had a chance to say anything, Lex quickly accessed the design interface and waved his right hand as he willed a ramp to appear beside the stairs, giving the image that he had made the change himself. Hugo froze, shocked by the sudden change, which gave Lex the chance to quickly mentally add an elevator inside the inn right beside the stairs for guests to use. From the outside no one was able to tell anything had changed at all, and no one was able to see the image of a tiny, floating Mary giggling at Lex's embarrassment. Or at least, the guests weren't able to. Welcome back, Hugo. I see you've brought someone with you this time. I'm glad the Midnight Inn is able to get your recommendation. Hugo, who snapped out of his surprise, smiled at the mysterious innkeeper. Of course. Your inn is impressive beyond all of my expectations, even beyond all of my wildest dreams. Who wouldn't want to go on vacation, heal from their old wounds and even elevate their cultivation level while they were at it? There's nothing that can compare. In fact, that's why I've brought my boss this time as well. He's been suffering from a disease for a long time. I was hoping that he would be able to be healed as well. Lex turned his attention to the man in the wheelchair, and indeed his condition didn't look good at all. In fact, it could be said that he was almost at death's door. He checked the man's status. Name, William Bentham. Age, 59. Sex, male. Cultivation details, initial foundation realm. Species, human. Midnight and prestige level, not yet available. Conditions. Fatal spirit energy poisoning. Report. The patient is cultivating spirit energy with an affinity that directly clashes with his body's affinity. The more spirit energy he absorbs, the faster the rate of poisoning. The only way to treat the patient is to completely dissolve his foundation realm and then use the recovery pod to slowly heal him. It is recommended that the patient also drinks Botlum's Dew immediately following the dissolution of his foundation to prevent dying before recovery can begin. Patient is on the verge of death, immediate treatment is recommended. Chapter 65 Old Man Will. Lex frowned as he read the report on Will. Spiritual affinity was something he'd never heard of before. He wasn't exactly sure what that meant. He was also confused by what the system meant by saying, dissolve the foundation. Was a person's cultivation realm something they could just give up? He asked Mary about the details. Originally this is something I did not know, but as you've elevated your authority by a few levels I have received the answer from the system. Spiritual energy originally is neutral, but it can gain affinities. For example, if a person is using a cultivation technique that is based on fire, or relies on heated environments or natural treasures that have the fire element, then when that person absorbs spiritual energy, his cultivation technique will give it a fire affinity. That means the spiritual energy that person has stored in his body will have the characteristics of fire, and he can use spiritual attacks based on fire. The case with Will is similar. The cultivation technique he is using is based on fire, but his body inherently has an affinity for water. Not everyone has natural affinities, and people who have them can be considered to have special constitutions. As a result of Will's natural affinity clashing with the affinity of the spirit energy he is absorbing, instead of becoming stronger he is being poisoned. As for dissolving his foundation, that is an easy way of describing it. To understand, let me explain to you how the different levels of cultivation work. Body tempering strengthens the body to absorb spiritual energy within it without being hurt by it. Qi training, which also has 9 realms, involves absorbing spiritual energy in the body, and then pushing the limits of how much energy the body can store. Each time a cultivator breaks through a subrealm in Qi training, their capacity for spiritual energy is increased. But where in the body is this energy being stored? Later, in the golden core realm, the energy is stored in the core, however before that the energy is stored in the muscles, tissues and organs of the body. In simple words, Qi training only focuses on the quantity of spirit energy that the body can hold. It forces the body to absorb as much energy as possible. Suffice to say, the better the cultivation technique or the talent of the cultivator, the more energy they can absorb. However, this changes in the foundation realm. The spirit energy that has so far been absorbed by the body is neutral, and of very low quality. In fact, if spiritual energy that is purer or higher in concentration can actually harm the cultivator, the foundation realm starts building a foundation in the body to sustain higher concentrations as well as quality of spiritual energy. One of the steps involved in this naturally changes the neutral spiritual energy in the body to that of one with an affinity. How that works is irrelevant to you right now. What you need to know right now is what dissolving the foundation means. It's a nice way of putting it, but basically if all the muscles and tissue in the body simultaneously sustain enough damage, without directly killing the cultivator, then the spiritual energy in the body will be released and the cultivation realm of the person will drop. Usually, if a person survives such an ordeal, their body is so damaged that they can never cultivate again. You should be able to avoid that happening by immediately putting him in the recovery pod so that his body heals correctly. However, the old man is weak. I don't know if he can survive such a shock. Also, even weak, he's in the foundation realm and you're in the body tempering. There's no way you can help him dissolve his foundation. You'll have to get Hugo to do it. That was a lot of information to absorb, and he had silently been staring at the old man for a bit now. Hugo was starting to get worried, but just as he was about to ask a question, the innkeeper spoke up. His condition is complicated. Whether he can be healed or not depends on whether or not you trust me, and are willing to take a risk. Hugo looked down at the old man with a questioning gaze. Even though he himself had a higher cultivation than Will, the old man's family had been in the cultivation world for centuries and had a lot of influence. Hugo needed his help to find his family's murderers, so he really hoped that Will could be healed. Will, who had been silent so far, removed the oxygen mask from his face and gave the mysterious innkeeper a weak smile. For some reason, Will felt like he could trust the old man unconditionally. If he wasn't in unbearable pain, he would have liked to have a chat with him. For now though, he would trust his gut and put his life in the mysterious man's hands. I have nothing left to lose. We'll do whatever you say. Lex nodded at the old man's determination. Then he explained Will's problem, exactly as he read about it in the report. He did not know if affinities were common knowledge, and would only explain if asked. When the old man heard what the issue was, he suddenly came to a realization. It's as if the pains of his entire life suddenly made sense to him, as well as why his condition had suddenly deteriorated. Originally he was going to wait for Hugo to return and see if there was a way for him to heal, but after feeling spirit energy from the key he thought maybe he was getting better and tried to absorb energy from a medium spirit stone. His condition had drastically gotten worse since. He chuckled to himself. He did know about affinities, as well as special constitutions. Who could have guessed that he was someone countless people considered a genius, but he made a mistake right at the first step and chose the wrong cultivation technique. Lex explained the procedure that Will needed to undergo, and while Hugo was startled, Will did not have much of a reaction. He was too exhausted, mentally and physically, at this point. Since Hugo had already bought a bottle of boundless dew, they went directly to the room with a recovery pod, RP. Are you sure you want me to dissolve his cultivation? Wouldn't it be better if you did it? Asked Hugo, reluctant to hurt Will. He didn't want to use too much strength and accidentally kill him. Lex shook his head and answered, I apologize, but I cannot harm a guest, even to help them, unless they break a rule of the Midnight Inn. It will have to be you. That was the excuse Lex had thought up, and though it was flimsy it would have to do. Will lay down in the recovery pod and Hugo put his hand over the old man's chest. Slowly and carefully he channeled his spirit energy all over the old man's body, till a thin layer of it covered him. Looking in the eyes of Will one last time, Hugo gave him a nod, to let him know he was about to do it, and then let his spirit energy attack Will. In an instant the old man went from being pale and trembling to covered in blood and completely still. Using his fastest speed, Hugo chugged the bottle of boundless dew down his throat and closed the lid for the RP. The RP started working immediately, but the old man lay still and unresponsive. He looked like a corpse being poked and prodded, but Lex could use the system to monitor his status. The old man went to within an inch of his life. To be more exact, his heart stopped beating for a few moments and his brain activity started to decrease, but the boundless dew kept him from completely dying for a few critical seconds. Just because he was in the pod did not mean he could not die, as was the case with Marlowe as well, but fortunately after a couple of minutes he went out being in a critical condition. At this point the spirit energy was leaking out of his body, his cultivation falling, and the RP was more focused on keeping him alive than healing him. The boundless dew, which normally took a long time to show its full effect, had already been used up in keeping him alive long enough for the RP to take over. If nothing unexpected happened, he would survive, though he most likely would have to start cultivating from chi training again. It's okay. He's past the critical stage. He should be fine. Hugo let out a breath of relief. He thought he had killed the old man. Lex left the two alone. The healing process would take a long time and no doubt Hugo wanted to stay with Will a bit longer to ensure he was okay. But instead of returning to previous activity of improving the inn and considering where to add the greenhouse, he walked in a particular direction. He remembered that he had another guest at his inn, and he had previously sent her a Saturn cake. Lex wanted to check up on her, and if the opportunity presented itself learn more about her famous friend, Alexander. Chapter 66 Spendthrift. Velma, has Helen's mood improved at all while I was gone? Lex asked as he walked towards the hills that carried the meditation room. His host attire, which was in sync with the inn, let him know where all his guests were at all times, so he had no problem locating her in the large area of the inn. But while normally he teleported directly wherever he wanted, this time he chose to walk. Firstly, it was because he was considering a good place to place his greenhouse, and secondly he wanted to understand how his guests felt walking around. Her mood did seem to improve when she had the cake, and instead of sulking in one place she's been wandering around the grounds of the inn. Still, she hasn't interacted with Gerard or I much, and hasn't eaten much food. Lex nodded as he continued to stroll through the inn. For now the grounds around the inn weren't too big, just a few acres in fact, which meant you could see end to end easily. However, walking from one corner to another, such as the recovery room to the meditation room, still took a bit of time. It was fine for him, but he had to keep in mind that not all of his guests could traverse the area easily, such as Will. He twitched his lips, but mentally bought a golf cart from the midnight market that he parked beside the manor. He then instructed his AI to offer to drive his guests around whenever they saw them walking to a specific destination. Eventually, even with his slow pace, he reached the hills and found Helen sitting in the grass with a couple of rabbits playing around her. She also had one in her lap that she was gently stroking, her gaze off into the distance. She was brought back from her thoughts by the sound of someone approaching, and looked to see the innkeeper. She had seen him when she had just arrived at the inn, but since then the mysterious man had disappeared. She had been too preoccupied with her thoughts and had completely forgotten about him. "Good afternoon," the innkeeper greeted her, his voice smooth as butter. "I hope your stay here has been satisfactory." "Yes, it has been great. I wanted to thank you for the cake, it was delicious." "You're very welcome, it is a delicacy from the Jotun system that is fairly popular. I plan on opening up a patisserie for my guests in the future, but until then it should hold them over." The innkeeper spoke softly and calmly, with a warm and easygoing presence. He sat down in the grass nearby, and a few rabbits hopped on over to him, as if attracted by his aura. He gently petted them, as if he were meeting an old friend after a long time. "If you don't mind my mentioning," he said, turning his gaze from the fluffy animal to her, "my staff told me that you haven't eaten much. Although you have been healed from your poison state, it has extracted a lot of strength from your body. If you do not take care of yourself then you will fall ill." Helen blushed, and for the first time in a long time she felt like an admonished child. She felt like she had been behaving like a spoiled little girl, throwing a tantrum at being treated unfairly. "I will take better care of myself," she said meekly. Helen was not a meek woman, she was confident and strong, and while she gave respect to her superiors, it was not out of weakness but from her upbringing. As someone being raised for political marriage, she was not raised to be only a pretty face but a strong asset and ally for whoever she ended up with. She was extremely capable and was always treated as such. Even Alexander, who generally treated her very well, knew that she was more reliable than most and so treated her as someone strong and someone who did not need to be looked after. After all, treating someone strong with delicacy was not care but disrespectful. However, for some reason, she did not seem to mind it when this mysterious man was looking out for her like this. "I'm glad to hear it," the man said, a smile appearing on his handsome face. "If you have any other troubles, feel free to talk to me about them. Maybe I won't be able to offer you any direct help, but as someone who has been to many worlds and seen many cultures across the universe my perspective is probably different from anyone you've met." Various thoughts ran across her mind as the innkeeper made his offer. She was not having a small crisis but one that overturned her whole life. Even though she knew she was being raised for a purpose, she loved her family dearly. Yet she had been thrown aside, and there was nowhere left for her on earth unless she returned with a new identity. And even if she returned, what would she do? She had lost her direction in life. She did not want revenge, but she also did not know what she did want. "Thank you for the offer," she said shaking her head, "but this is something I must figure out on my own." "I understand," the innkeeper said, getting up. "If you need me, feel free to reach out through one of my staff. If you get bored during your stay, I recommend you try out the mystery trial behind the manor. It is something I just added to the inn. First try is free for guests, so you have nothing to lose and the trials are perfectly safe." The innkeeper smiled at her one more time and then disappeared. Helen felt a sense of loss when he left, but she picked herself up and started walking back to the manor. She would eat something, and then she would continue to think. Moping was not her style, but she needed to figure out her new direction in life before she would feel better. Lex was slightly disappointed when the girl refused to confide in him, but he could not insist on getting her to talk. He had to maintain his mystique. He reappeared at the northernmost point of the inn and prepared himself for some heavy spending. Spending 5,000 MP in the midnight market, he bought himself a relatively powerful array that was arranged from trees. As soon as he made the purchase, pine trees started growing around, and ultimately covered an entire acre of land around him. Then in the center of the new forest, he chose to purchase the greenhouse for another 425 MP, transforming the land 5,000 square feet around him into arable land. After all his expenditure he was left with 11,836 MP. That was still quite a lot, but did it really allow him to spend his MP so randomly? The answer was, this was not a random purchase. The forest array served an important purpose, which was that it would redirect anyone who entered away from the center without letting them realize. The effect was very simple and did not harm anyone in any way, but it was exactly for that reason that the array could affect even those of a very high cultivation level. This way his greenhouse, which was directly in the center of the forest, would be out of reach for the guests. Of course, as the owner and controller of the array, Lex could choose to allow someone to pass through if he wanted. What was an array exactly? Similar to how spirit techniques used spirit energy to give rise to different effects, and talismans used spirit energy as well as the complex science of spirit engineering to give birth to seemingly magical results, arrays used natural treasures and spirit treasures to have different effects over a certain piece of land. By arranging treasures, or array flags, spirit treasures that served a single, very specific purpose, in a complex design one could arrange an array that served various purposes. It could be a protective array that stopped incoming enemies or attacks from entering an area. It could be an attacking array that attacked enemies with it. It could even be a spirit gathering array that gathered spirit energy from the atmosphere and filled the area of the array with concentrated spirit energy, a boon for cultivation. In short, it could have various effects and all depended on the user's purpose. With that out of the way, Lex spent another 2,000 MP to purchase a permanent AI worker for the greenhouse. Despite the heavy cost, the AIs that Lex purchased could only be human-shaped and could have no special abilities, only a certain amount of knowledge regarding certain fields. Lex didn't name this AI and instead decided to just call him the gardener, to keep it simple and easy to remember. He handed the gardener all the seeds and cuttings he brought from Nibiru and told him to begin planting them, and try to save as many of them as he could. As he watched the gardener begin to work, he came to the painful realization that he may have to hire an actual living person with an affinity or ability for raising plants, as the inn let him know of the various special needs of each plant that was being planted, and they were not simple to say the least. Chapter 67 Protagonist Halo. Lex watched silently as the gardener carefully started digging potholes for the cuttings he had brought. The greenhouse had few special features that greatly aided in the growth of plants. Firstly, the soil was filled with concentrated spirit energy, which would not only increase the speed of growth of plants, it would also improve their quality. Even common plants grown here would absorb spirit energy. Secondly, the chances of transported plants or plant cuttings dying was reduced drastically. However, this was only the first level of the greenhouse and the benefits it could provide were limited. It pained him to learn that for more valuable plants, such as those that granted humans extra strength back on Nibiru, he would need to provide special fertilizers and spirit water. Both of those things would cost him a lot of MP. Fortunately, for now he could make do without them. He told the gardener that he wanted him to focus on growing a lot of the vine Tiffany's treasure. Using the system he could get the proper name for the plant, but he decided to stick to the name the little girl had told him. He was just about to leave the garden when he received another notification. New quest: with a garden available in your backyard, it's time to improve the quality of your food. Grow spiritual vegetables for the inn's kitchen. Quest time limit, 2 weeks. Quest reward, rare plant seeds. Quest failure punishment, -1000 MP. Remarks: in certain parts of the world common farmers have abs, but you even as a cultivator only have flab. Roll up your sleeves and put some work in. Lex was incensed. He had abs, okay. Maybe not to the level of Instagram models, but he was getting there. Anyway, he ignored the ignorant, insensitive system for now and focused on the time limit. 2 weeks. It was too short. Could he grow anything in this time? You don't need to worry and just plant normal seeds, they will grow quickly enough. You don't need to even have a large variety at the moment. Even if just a couple of ingredients in a dish are spiritual, then it will have a completely different result. Just look for whatever is easily available. Lex nodded, and decided to make this his first priority. This was a relatively easy quest. He wanted the quickest reward he could get, along with hopefully some upgrades. He returned to his apartment, already planning on getting seeds with same-day delivery, but the moment he returned all thoughts of vegetables were thrown out the window. He was standing in his room, but everything had been overturned. His mattress had been ripped up, his things were cluttered on the floor and his clothes thrown out of his closet. Warily he crept outside his room to find the rest of his apartment in the same state. His first thought was robbery, but that didn't make sense. His TV and gaming consoles, the easiest items to steal, were still there, they were just broken. His furniture was either broken into pieces or ripped through with daggers. Someone had clearly ransacked the place. He was standing still, trying to figure out what the most appropriate reaction should be. He couldn't report this incident to Bluebird, his token was at home but he was not there during the incident. That could only mean that he had left his apartment without the token. Whether Bluebird would be able to find the culprit was an entirely different matter. They would most likely prosecute him first. For the same reason he couldn't go to the police. He was still thinking of what to do when he heard his ringtone, and traced the sound to his phone which had fallen underneath his bed. A glance he was able to tell that he had missed a few calls, all from Larry. He picked up and heard an urgent voice from the other end. Lex? Lex? Is that you? Are you alright? I've been trying to reach you for hours. I'm fine, he replied. But something tells me that you think I shouldn't be. I ran into some goons from Ultimate Fighting Fortress, and suffice to say they roughed me up. So did Matilda, and that ended really badly. She's in Bluebird custody right now, and I heard quite a few people were sent to the CCU in a hospital. When you weren't picking up I feared the worst, but I'm being monitored so there's no way I could come to you. Lex frowned. What did Ultimate Fighting Fortress want with them? Their fight should be with Marlowe, and he hasn't even been on Earth in a while. I just got back to my apartment, and the place has been completely trashed. I was wondering what happened. It looks like they paid me a visit as well. Do you know what they want? I looked into it. Apparently Marlowe has disappeared, and that's caused some people to worry. When he didn't reappear after the Alexander incident in Egypt, some of his enemies started worrying that he was planning a move against him. They picked a fight with his family as well, and I heard there was even an incident with his mother. Someone is trying to provoke him into reappearing. You, Matilda and I are just collateral damage. So what now? Won't the Bluebird do anything? You don't understand. He's a very high-leveled cultivator. His sudden disappearance makes all the ICPAs nervous as well. They won't directly act against him, but as long as no one goes too overboard, they won't interfere in this matter. But God only knows how long Marlowe will be gone, Lex said exasperated, for more than one reason. Every day that former giant stayed away cost Lex MP. What are we supposed to do in the meantime? I can't get pulled into a fight like this. Before Lex could continue, someone kicked in his door and 3 shady-looking men walked into his apartment. Well, look who's finally returned, said the short man who was in the lead. He was wearing a tracksuit and a few chains and was covered in tattoos. Lex didn't mean to stereotype, but the guy definitely looked like trouble. Who are you? What do you want? Lex asked forcefully. Deep down, he really wanted to avoid trouble. Earth was supposed to be the place where he laid low, without attracting any attention. He didn't mind getting into trouble in other places, but his family was on Earth. He absolutely could not risk them. Before the man could reply, Lex reached into his backpack and pulled out the heavy Harley. He did not aim it at anyone, but the threat was evident. The 3 men stopped in their tracks when they saw the gun, but didn't leave. The short man let out a whistle as he admired the weapon. You know, it's pretty hard to get a carry permit for one of those in New York. You must have friends in high places. But that's okay, we just want to be friends too. Lex eyed the 3, still a little hesitant. He wanted to avoid a confrontation if possible. He put the phone back to his ear and said, "Let Bluebird know I have a few guests in my apartment." He shut the phone and threw it away, his stance still hostile towards the 3. I'll ask again, who are you and what do you want? The authorities will be here soon, and I'm sure it'll be in everyone's interest if you're not here when they arrive. The short man was still looking at the gun. You know, I vaguely recall that Marlowe registered one of these guns recently. That's a pretty strange thing, that he would do it himself. He's a big man, he has secretaries for stuff like that, even minions. I wonder, could it be your gun that he registered? You guys must be close. The short man was smirking now, and looking at Lex with eager eyes. I sold him a treasure, in exchange he gave me a weapon. However, that's none of your business. Please leave, before I get agitated. My finger starts twitching when I'm nervous. Hey, alright. We're leaving, the man said, signaling his men to slowly back out. But I believe we got off on the wrong foot. We only want to be friends, and have a little chat if at all possible. You know what, I'll give you a call sometime. We'll meet outside, somewhere in public, so you don't need to be nervous. I believe it'll be in your interest as well. After all, you don't want rumors spreading around about yourself. You know the internet is a crazy place, people love cooking up conspiracies about illegitimate children and whatnot. Buddy, I don't know if you're saying that I have kids, or that I'm someone's illegitimate child. But someone broke my TV and I'm pissed, so if you don't get out of here right now I think I might decide to keep you till Bluebird shows up. This time, Lex aimed the gun directly towards the man. The man didn't retort, and left the apartment, giving Lex a wink right before he left. Lex waited a while, and then checked the hallway outside to find it empty. He let out a sigh. Was this the famous, get into trouble for no reason, protagonist Halo he'd read in so many novels? Chapter 68 Marital Problems. A tall, beautiful lady sat with her legs crossed on a sofa, her long blonde hair falling over her shoulders. She was wearing a suit but had taken off her shoes, but the casual look did nothing to diminish her overwhelming charm. She was sitting in a private lounge, the table before filled with various sushi dishes. She was listening to a man making a report and she leaned forward and grabbed a California roll with her chopsticks and ate. Guards were standing in the corners of the room, all extremely serious. The setting right now seemed quite harmonious, but everyone knew that the truth was contrary to how it appeared. The woman's name was Sofia Ramos, formerly known as Sofia Bravi, Marlowe's wife. Officially the two were still married, but their separation had been quite public, and in the original sense of the word, epic. No one knew the exact reason for their separation, but the consequences were so drastic that multiple ICPAs had to get involved. A small town had been destroyed in their fight, and the officials had to report it to the public as a sudden earthquake. It was said that when they were together no one had ever been in as much love as Sofia was with her husband, and when they separated no one could hate someone the way she did. Like her husband, she was a golden core cultivator. She was also the head of one of the largest and most influential cultivator families in Europe, the Ramos family. However, she did not live in Spain, where her family's strength was focused. She lived in New York, where she could keep a close eye on her dear husband. Some time ago, the man disappeared from the public eye. It was not surprising as he was one of the strongest members, if not the strongest member, of the Bravi family. Although he had long since paid back whatever he owed that family, there were times when the family requested him to use his specific skills. This was not to mention that Marlowe himself ran multiple enterprises, and sometimes they would require him to handle sensitive matters. But matters became different after the Egypt incident. Even ignoring the serious political waves the incident brought throughout the cultivation world, Marlowe himself had a relationship with the Morrison family. An incident of that scale did not simply finish, there were repercussions that would last years if not decades. Everyone would have to make their stance clear, alliances had to be made or broken, forces strengthened, protections and precautions had to be taken. Yet the man still had no response. Even the Bravi family was alarmed by his absence, and quietly started looking for him. If he kept his silence for too long, and did not reappear, people might even begin to suspect that he was directly involved in the assassination attempt, as he had disappeared right before it. Whether other people were beginning to be suspicious of his actions or not was still unclear, but Ultimate Fighting Fortress, Sofia's personal organization, was very open in their search for him. When traces of him could not be found using official methods, they started getting aggressive. A distant observer might think that perhaps the wife was concerned about him, that he needed to clear his name before the Morrison family took notice, but at least the people standing in this room did not think so. A phone rang, breaking the subtle peace in the room, but everyone breathed a sigh of relief when they saw Sofia picking her own up and answering. Any updates? We've finished looking up all of his recent students. He's had a closer relationship with two of them, a Matilda Ross and a Lex William. The scope of his extra interactions with them has not been too unusual, but it's still a lead. A background check of Lex revealed to be quite ordinary, but Matilda's background is clearly forged. She also sent some of our men to the hospital. We're looking further into her, but the latest report said that she disappeared from Bluebird custody. Were you able to extract any information from them? His other students said he gave them a week off before leaving, but they don't know anything else. Matilda attacked our men as soon as they tried to intimidate her, and Lex pulled out a gun as soon as he made contact. Both of them showed a very aggressive response, which does not reflect their social standing or cultivation level. Although at the moment we do not believe Lex was related to his disappearance, for several hours our men were unable to locate him as he had gone without his Bluebird token, which is why he's still under suspicion. Keep investigating. Also, send my dear mother-in-law some flowers, and invite her over for some coffee. Understood, said the man at the other end of the phone before hanging up. For a few moments Sofia was still, as if thinking, before her face warped into a grimace and she crushed the phone in her hand. She threw the broken pieces across the room before screaming, "That scum is cheating on me. I know it." The men in the room trembled, but said nothing. Marlowe himself had a fearsome reputation, but Sofia was the name people used to scare their children at night. Lex propped his broken door against the entrance where it used to reside and returned to his apartment. He took a look around before saying, "Mary the First, don't trust my judgment right now. I need some advice. I can't tell you what to do, but I can give you a few suggestions based on what you want to do. What are you thinking? I need to decide how to respond to this. I really don't want to get involved in any trouble on Earth, but I'm also really pissed at those people for trashing my apartment." That's too vague. Let me ask you another question. What are your top priorities right now? Lex thought for a while before answering, raising my cultivation, developing my inn and keeping my family safe. In that case, you should plan according to what you want. Although originally a self-defense class was not a bad idea, right now it has caused you problems. Drop out of the class immediately, and then figure out the easiest way to get out of the public eye. Focus only on your cultivation and the inn. In fact, you should know that the inn will allow you to have your own home in a separate space from the inn. You should complete quests till you unlock that, and then completely move away from Earth until your cultivation is strong enough. There is no reason to put yourself in unnecessary danger. As for your family, simply introduce them to the cultivation world, and then tell them to remain low-key as well. There's no need to keep cultivation a secret from them, it serves no purpose. Dropping out? Don't you think that's a little drastic? Let me guess, Mary said with a knowing look, you don't want to drop out because you'll feel guilty or because you don't want to compromise your relationship with Marlowe. Is that right? Lex didn't answer immediately, but eventually gave a reluctant nod. Lex, you can't risk yourself for such a stupid reason. You may like Marlowe, but his complicated life has directly caused you to be in danger, or at least some trouble. You have to get your priorities straight and act accordingly. With the system and the inn you can grow so much stronger and be exposed to so much, but that doesn't mean you're immortal or won't die. The system may feel like a cheat or a shortcut, but if it's not used properly then that's on you. Even the best cheat can't help you if you don't use it well and keep getting distracted. Lex felt like he was getting scolded, but ultimately agreed with the tiny floating projection. He was making things more complicated than they needed to be. He should focus on the inn and his cultivation, and once he was as strong or even stronger than Marlowe, he could do whatever he wanted on Earth and he would have no worries. Just as Lex made his decision there was a knock on his broken door, before someone moved it aside and entered his apartment. Lex, to his great surprise, saw his old boss Jessica entering his apartment followed by a few men. She was dressed formally, in a beige dress, but the men behind her were in police uniforms. Are you okay? We were told there were intruders, she said with some concern in her voice. Lex however was not buying it. Even if she worked for Bluebird, it was too coincidental that the one person he knew answered his distress call. Larry told him that even Bluebird was concerned about Marlowe's whereabouts, and it seemed they wanted to try and see if they could get any answers from him. Chapter 69 Capitalistic Mentality. Of course there were intruders. Does this look like the kind of redecoration I would do? Lex said between bared teeth. Someone had come in and trashed his entire apartment, and then came once again to threaten him, but Bluebird delayed their response to find Jessica because she had a connection to him. He was feeling pissed at Ultimate Fighting Fortress, UFF, and annoyed at Bluebird, and it was coming out right now. Lex, calm down, you're being too aggressive, Mary told him. You need to maintain a good relationship with the authorities. Lex realized his words and tone were too strong. He closed his eyes and took a deep breath, holding it in for a few seconds before breathing out. I apologize, he said looking at Jessica again. I was a bit emotional. I am not used to this kind of thing. It's completely understandable, Jessica replied, looking around the apartment. To be honest, handling incidents of cultivator violence was not her domain in Bluebird. Her work was more logistical, and she rarely ever entered the field. It was true, however, that she was called on an emergency basis to handle this case because of her connection with Lex. She had been on a date that had to be cut short which annoyed her, but she maintained her professionalism. She had been briefed that other than handling the immediate incident, she should try to investigate Lex's relationship with Marlowe as well as if he had any information on him. No one expected Lex to know, but there was no harm in being thorough. Before anything else, are you hurt? Do you require any medical attention? No, I'm fine. Then can you walk me through what happened? As the two of them talked, the two police officers were looking around the apartment to get a clear idea of the scope of the incident. There wasn't a single part of the apartment that hadn't seen some damage. 3 guys broke into my apartment and started trashing the place. I tried to ask them what they wanted but they were very forceful. Lex lied through his teeth flawlessly, as if the truth was exactly as he described. He didn't want Bluebird to know he was gone for a while and the apartment was destroyed behind his back. They seemed to be looking for something. When they couldn't find it, they came for me. Fortunately I have this for self-defense, he said, pulling out the heavy Harley. As soon as I took out the gun I threatened them to leave. Maybe I could have told them to wait till you guys appeared but I didn't want to take a chance. Jessica took a look at the gun and said, yes, we saw that you had a registered weapon. But you should be more careful, if they had weapons as well it could have turned into a confrontation. Do you have any idea what they were after? No clue, they weren't exactly chatty and I wasn't in the mood to ask. Although Lex was trying to control himself, it was apparent that he was agitated, though no one thought that was unusual as he had just been through a traumatic experience. Jessica asked him a few more questions, but Lex would always answer that he did not know anything. He did not know who these people were, why they were after him or what they were looking for. He was completely attempting to distance himself from the situation. Finally, with no actual information on hand and no way to lead the conversation, Jessica had to ask the question she was wondering up front. It says on your profile that you've registered for self-defense classes, but your trainer took a leave. Do you know anything about that? No, not much, he just gave us a week off. Wait, was this because of him? Did these people find me because they were looking for him? Lex asked, feigning his shock and anger extremely well. No, of course not. I just thought that if he were around you could ask him what to do in a break-in situation. Having a direct confrontation against 3 intruders is not a smart idea. Jessica covered herself really well, but Lex showed a doubtful look. They asked him a few more questions, until they finally left. They told him they'd contact him again if they made any progress on the investigation, and asked him if he wanted to follow them to a safe house. Lex naturally declined to follow them as he had other plans. He took Mary's suggestion and decided he was going to drop out of Marlowe's class and leave for a while. As for his family, he decided that he'd tell them about cultivation whenever he met them personally next time. Actually, there was a Bluebird program that helped new cultivators explain to their immediate families about the cultivation world. This was so that there would be a bit of credibility when these people talked to their families, and to avoid accidents. However, Lex didn't want to think about that right now. Dealing with family was always complicated, he wanted to avoid thinking about it. Leaving Marlowe's class was not normally an easy procedure, as it was in his contract that once you started you could not stop or you would be prosecuted. It was an unusual clause, but in this situation Lex had an easy out as he could claim his life had been endangered because of Marlowe. He wrote up an email and sent it to the official email attached to the self-defense class before he left his apartment. He only grabbed his phone, wallet, Bluebird token and heavy Harley that he stored in his backpack. Nothing else in the apartment was worth putting any effort into. He hailed a taxi and told the driver an address he'd looked up online. He arrived at a skyscraper and quickly made his way in. At the reception he showed his token and said, "I'm here to register at Balor's castle." The receptionist scanned the token, and after checking if everything was in order, told him to take the elevator to the 20th level. Of course, the 20th level she was referring to was the basement level, not the floors in the high-rise. Lex, already used to this system by now, and directly went underground. The reason why he was so decisive about coming here was because he'd done a lot of research on Balor's castle since Larry told him about it. They took their role of protection quite seriously, and had a very positive reputation in the cultivator community. He would relocate using their help, and also finally gain an affiliation with an organization on Earth. Although he wanted to avoid doing so, it couldn't be helped. At least this one was not so demanding of its members. When he reached the floor he was greeted with a bold Balor's Castle imprinted on the wall, along with various images of its leading members. Lex only glanced at it before heading towards the reception on this level. Joining an organization was not as quick and straightforward as he had seen so many characters do in books. After scanning his token and checking his profile on the Bluebird database, they checked his criminal history. Once they were done with that, they checked his social media to check if he had any extremist views or dubious connections. Then came the paperwork. Oh Lord, there was so much paperwork. Lex felt like he'd spent hours filling out forms, answering questions, and then redoing some parts that the receptionist told him he did wrong. They wanted to know everything about him, from his academic records to his professional experience, his medical history to his political affiliations if he had any. When it came to his cultivation, it was mandatory to list his level as well as how long he had been cultivating for, followed by optional questions where he could write down the details of his cultivation technique. Lex left all the optional questions and then submitted the paperwork and began waiting for the final process, the personal interview. Under normal circumstances he was told that the interview would be scheduled in a few weeks, but he told them that he was in an emergency, after which they revealed to him the option to pay for an express interview. He didn't know if he should be cursing or grateful for the capitalistic mentality. Naturally he paid the $5,000 express fee and was led to the interview room where he waited silently for his interview to begin. To be honest, he was surprised by how thorough the organization was in its joining process. He assumed it would have been easier and more straightforward. The receptionist then told him that because Balor's Castle took their role so seriously, they were also very selective in who they allowed in. Criminals or people with potential ulterior motives were not allowed to join. He supposed that was good for him, as long as his interview went smoothly and he could join. For now, all he could do was wait. Chapter 70 Teenagers. 2 men and a woman entered the room, all holding folders Lex assumed held information about him. They all looked relatively relaxed and gave off friendly vibes that made Lex feel more confident about his chances. They sat down across from him and introduced themselves before diving right into the interview. "Mr. Lex, can you tell me what interested you about Balor's Castle?" "The freedom and safety," Lex answered promptly, "especially the safety part. Since I accidentally learned about the cultivation world, the strongest impression I've gotten is that it is very unsafe. I spent a lot of time researching various organizations, but Balor's Castle is the one I felt could best safeguard me and my interests. Well, we would like to thank you for your confidence in us. We try our best to uphold our standards to the best of our abilities. Have you tried joining any organization before, and if so, which ones?" No, I haven't tried joining any organization before. I am very new to the cultivation world, and considering how dangerous it seems, I've tried to minimize my contact with other cultivators as much as I can. I did take a self-defense class for cultivators, but even then I have kept mostly to myself. Mr. Lex, you've mentioned a few times that you are concerned about your safety. Do you have any enemies? No, of course not. Why would I have any enemies? Mr. Lex, I hope you don't mind, but it is standard procedure to run background checks on our applicants. According to our research, there was an incident report at your apartment just a few hours ago. Could you tell us about that? There was a break-in at my apartment. They completely destroyed everything I own and even threatened me. That is what prompted me to come here. I realized that I wasn't safe on my own. Yes, of course, I can understand how such an incident can be traumatic and make one want to protect oneself. But tell me, do you have any idea why you were targeted? No, I've never seen them before and have no relation with them. Mr. Lex, I don't know if you're aware, but the cultivator community in New York is very tight-knit. Rumors get around quickly, and rumor is that a lot of people have been investigating your self-defense instructor, Mr. Marlowe. Do you think you could have been targeted because of your connection to him? He is my instructor, and other than that I have no connection to him. I don't know why I would be targeted because of him. The three investigators looked at one another, before pulling out a picture to show Lex. As soon as Lex saw, his lips twitched. It was a picture of him when he was going to Marlowe's apartment right after returning from Vegas Minima. He was battered and bruised and completely covered in dry blood. Suddenly he felt his chances in this interview had dropped drastically. Mr. Lex, this picture was pulled from security footage of you entering Mr. Marlowe's building some time ago. Having no context about this picture at all, it does not seem to me that your relationship with Mr. Marlowe is simple. Lex gulped as quickly started thinking of a good excuse. Velma was standing silently in the gift shop. She was an AI that worked at the Midnight Inn, however that did not mean that she was an emotionless and cold machine. It just meant that she was created and given intelligence artificially, and not born in the usual way. Although technically her age was less than a month old, she was mentally around 17. She was extremely disciplined and obeyed orders, so her mental age never compromised her work at the inn, but when she had no work to do she felt extremely bored. Gerard had the mental age of a 50-year-old man, so the two of them could not relate very much at all. The new addition to the inn, the gardener, was very boorish and Velma did not get along with him at all. All he wanted to do was dig and dig and dig. Her second boss, the tiny floating projection called Mary, was a little more fun. She would occasionally gossip with Velma about her first boss, the Innkeeper. Speaking of whom, the Innkeeper was incredibly handsome and Velma always felt very shy around him. A few times she wanted to strike up a conversation with him, but every time she wanted to she could not make herself do it. She let out a sigh, she was really bored. But right then her second boss appeared before her. Velma, the Innkeeper is busy and some new guests are entering the inn. Receive them. Immediately, she answered as she disappeared, reappearing at the entrance. From a bright light a young man ran out, holding the hand of a young woman. The pair of teenagers looked very troubled. Horace, where are we? Asked the young woman, panting. I have no idea, Aisha, but I think we've lost them for now, the teenager replied, wiping the imaginary sweat off his brow. Aisha, who was relieved to hear that they had lost their pursuers, threw herself into Horace's arms and started sobbing. Oh Horace, what are we going to do? They're never going to let us be together. Your family will move away across the oceans and I'll never see you again. Then I will swim the oceans if I have to. Nothing can separate me from you. The two lovers continued to talk to one another, professing their love and imagining the various struggles the world would throw their way, denying them the one thing that they both wanted, love. It was as if it was predestined that they were not to be, their difficulties far beyond the petty hurdles of Romeo and Juliet. Velma, who was waiting for a chance to introduce them to the inn, completely forgot her purpose, and was listening to their sweet nothings with glowing eyes. Since there was no television, or basically any kind of media available at the inn, this was the first time the young AI was getting a taste of teen romance and she was hooked. But long distance never works, said Aisha, breaking free from his arms and looking away. You'll go to college and make new friends and fall in love with some blonde bimbo, and I'll be left alone, with nothing but a memory of a time I was happy, if only for a moment. Their extremely cheesy lines and over-the-top emotions held Velma in a vice, and at the thought that the two lovers would be separated Velma suddenly remembered her job, and along with it she came up with an idea. Welcome guests, she said loudly, interrupting Horace's monologue about slaying all the bimbos that would stand between the two, to the Midnight Inn, the universe's best rendezvous for estranged lovers. The two teenagers turned their attention to Velma with a frown, but then suddenly realized that they were not alone. Aisha quickly pulled herself out of Horace's arms, he had hugged her once again, and quickly straightened her clothes, as if removing all proof or memory of the lover's embrace. Are humble and caters to people from across the universe, wherever they may be. It brings lovers together so that they can spend time with one another, walking in our gardens, climbing our hills, making memories free from pursuit or judgment. Across the universe you say? Asked Horace, intrigued. He accepted Velma's words quickly, as if traveling the universe were the most natural thing, and started rubbing his chin as if he were coming up with a plan. So this is like a dating spot? Aisha asked, curious. How scandalous, I love it. Velma lost a bit of her composure when she heard the inn being called a dating spot. If her bosses ever found out she'd be too embarrassed. Well, no, the inn doesn't cater to just lovers. Anyone who wants to enjoy our services can come. But lovers, especially lovers who have been separated, can come to the inn to enjoy their time together, so that their love can overcome all adversity. Poor Velma did not know that to some people what she was saying could be taken as the description of a love hotel that charged by the hour. It truly was a good thing that neither Mary nor Lex were here to hear this. Aisha's eyes started to slow as she looked at Horace excitedly. They both shared a look, and it was as if they both had found the solution to their problem. Why don't you show us around? Said Horace with a smile. I feel like we'll be coming here a lot. Please follow me, I believe you'll like what we have to offer. Just as she began to lead the two towards the inn, she came close to Horace and whispered, You should buy her a Saturn cake, trust me. I'll show it to you later. The three teenagers excitedly made their way into the manor, all of them thinking of their exciting futures. Chapter 71 Lovebirds. Velma led the two teenagers into the manor, and after providing a quick summary of everything they offered, she quickly took them to the gift shop. Since Velma was giving the tour, Gerard was behind the counter awaiting his customers patiently. The gift shop was small, and with only 11 items on display the shop looked almost empty, but each of the items was very eye-catching. Aisha and Horace looked at the items with interest, and were amazed when a description of each item appeared directly in their minds when they focused on them. The baby's candy and zombie cores were dismissed by them directly. The golden key, however, attracted their attention immediately. A key that let them enter the inn as they pleased, from anywhere in the universe, was exactly what the duo needed to organize their secret reunions at the inn. Without any hesitation Aisha bought 2 keys and gave one to Horace. Instead of paying with a credit card, as the guests before her had been doing, she opened up her purse and took out a jade bottle. She opened the top and with a dripper took out a single drop of a clear liquid from the bottle. Before she could explain what the liquid was, the single drop mysteriously disappeared from the dripper. Gerard smiled and said, Your payment has been accepted, but you have a remaining credit balance of around 10,000 MP. Would you like to keep the credit for further purchases or would you like your change? You can keep it for now, Aisha said, putting the jade bottle along with her golden key back. Hey Aisha, look at this, Horace said with excitement in his eyes. He was looking at a pair of prosthetic wings. In the display case their size had been reduced so they didn't attract too much attention, but once Horace learned what they did he was enamored. Aisha looked not at the wings but at the silly, excited boy, her gaze soft and loving. We'll take 2 of those as well, she said, pointing at the wings. Once she received the wings in card form the two lovers looked at everything else the gift shop had to offer. Botlamdu, one of the most popular items and Lex's personal favorite, was dismissed by the kids as none of them were hurt and didn't really have a need for it. The serene whistle, the item that helps with taming beasts, aroused some interest but not enough to purchase. The whistle of Barcelona, however, attracted Aisha's interest and she bought it for herself. The whistle of Barcelona was a one-of-a-kind item that summoned a wisp named Barcelona, which was a popular pet for children in the Jotun system, at least that's what the description said. Horace bought the Saturn cake, but with his credit card instead of using Aisha's tab, and put the cake that had been turned into a card for convenience into his pocket. With that they had seen everything in the gift shop and left the manor excitedly. Can we explore the rest on our own? Horace asked Velma. Of course, please enjoy yourselves. If you need me at any time, you only need to call out my name and I will appear by your side. Thanks, we will, Horace said politely. He turned to Aisha who handed him a pair of Icarus wings and he quickly attached them on his back. Putting them on was easy, all he had to do was touch his back to them and they would automatically attach themselves. They linked themselves to his mind so he could control them seamlessly, and before you knew it the pair was ready to take flight. The pair looked at each other and smiled. They were feeling slightly nervous but also extremely excited. They were gonna take each other's hand before taking off, but Velma suggested they get a hang of flying before trying something like that. It would be embarrassing if they crashed into each other right at takeoff. Aisha stuck her tongue out and then took off. The speed of her ascent was phenomenal, and it was as if she had spent her entire life flying. Horace took off as well, chasing after her as if they were playing a game of tag. The two young lovers soared through the sky, grinning and smiling as they chased after one another. The two were quickly joined by a pandemonium of parrots who flew around them gazing curiously at the two new giant birds. Aisha laughed as she saw the parrots flying around her, and she started leading them around. They did barrel rolls and nose dives, experimenting as their skill in flight grew. The sounds of laughter filled the inn, and Helen, who was sitting in a lawn chair with a rabbit in her lap, looked up to see what looked like two humans with wings flying around, playing in the air. Her jaw dropped in shock as she tried to absorb what she was seeing. The two kids were too far away for her to see properly, so she could not tell that what was on their backs were prosthetics. She imagined that these were visitors from somewhere else in the universe who looked like angels. Hugo, who was still with Will, heard the sound of laughter as well and came out to investigate. He was taken aback when he saw two kids flying in the air, but not as much as Helen. He already accepted that the inn was a magical place, so he would not be surprised even if he saw stranger things. Right now what he wanted to do was to continue cultivating, but it was important he be there when Will recovered, so returned to the RP room. When the two kids were done playing in the air, they started flying over the inn grounds, admiring the scenery, hand in hand. Holding hands in the air was much harder than they had imagined as their wings kept colliding, but ultimately they got the timing and rhythm required to do so. From the air the inn looked very simple, yet beautiful. There were only two significant landmarks that attracted their interest. The hills, covered in a field of flowers which gave off a feeling of seclusion and serenity. The meditation room on top of the hill looked interesting as well. The second landmark was the forest. The two flew towards the forest and were interested when they saw a clearing in the center, but for some reason as they started to fly towards the clearing they would always diverge. It was strange, all they had to do was fly straight, but somehow whenever they got close to the middle they would turn away without realizing and somehow wind up at the exit. After trying a couple of times, the kids gave up and started looking for a nice spot for a picnic. They chose a spot underneath the shade of a tree, and the two kids, exhausted from their adventure, sat down side by side. Horace took out a card from his pocket and summoned the cake. Aisha called Velma, who brought them a blanket, some plates, utensils and drinks. The two kids had never tasted such freedom before, and would remember this relatively simple day for the rest of their lives. Velma, who left the two kids to enjoy each other's company, kept looking out towards them, hoping that the kids would call her so she could hear more of their cheesy lines. Lex sighed as he stepped out the skyscraper, feeling tired. As one could imagine, his interview did not go too well. He was unable to answer why he was covered in blood, why he registered so many weapons under his name, why he bought so much tactical gear, or what his relationship with Marlowe was. To be honest, even he started to think of himself as a suspicious character after realizing how much information they had on him. He thought he was being sneaky, but there was a very clear trail of all his activities. Of course, there was no proof he had done anything wrong or unlawful, otherwise Bluebird would have called him in for questioning the way they had taken in Matilda, but Lex did not know that. The interviewers did not reject him outright, but only said that they would contact him after reviewing his profile, but he was under no delusion that he would be able to get in. If he had been paying attention, he would have been clued in on how his interview was going to go right at the beginning. After all, his three interviewers had introduced themselves as irrelevant character A, irrelevant character B and irrelevant character C. For some reason he had casually accepted their names, as if there was no obvious fourth wall being broken right there. "So what are you going to do now?" asked Mary, with a concerned look. "Well, I'm a little disappointed, but there's an even easier solution than looking for someone else. I'll just live at the inn. Who says I need a home on Earth? I can just come back whenever I need to do something. This way, no one will ever be able to track me." Mary nodded, as if she liked his answer. Lex grinned to himself, and then disappeared. Chapter 72, Bonus Chapter, Upgrade the Dating Spot. Horace and Aisha were both lying down on their picnic blanket, looking up at the parrots in the trees above them. All the parrots in the inn had gathered on the tree above the teenagers, as if acknowledging the pair as their leaders. After flying around everywhere they were already exhausted, and once they had their little picnic the duo felt sleepy. They didn't actually go to sleep, but they lay there, enjoying each other's company silently. As compared to their earlier enthusiastic and cheesy selves, they were a lot more somber. "We should head back," Horace said eventually, his voice reluctant. "When will your family head out?" "Tonight, probably." "Do you know where you'll be going?" "They'll probably send me to some academy. I'll probably be under supervision until that's done." Aisha didn't reply, but only nodded. Horace spent a few more minutes struggling. He had something he wanted to say, but he couldn't bring himself up to say it. Despite all his earlier bravado, he was still just a teenager and his experiences in life were limited. He could not help but be afraid of certain things. Even without looking at him, Aisha could tell there was something on his mind. She waited a few minutes to see if he spoke on his own, but when he continued to hesitate she said, "Don't keep your thoughts hidden. Secrets are not good for your soul, say whatever you want to say." Horace turned to look at his beloved, and she turned to look back at him. The two kids stared in each other's eyes in silence until Horace finally spoke. "Aisha, do you think we're making a mistake? I mean you. I'm just. Aisha chuckled. "Who put these doubts in your mind? Was it your parents? Or was it mine? Are you trying to say I could have anyone, so why should I be with you?" Horace didn't reply, but the worried look on his face said it all. "If I can be with anyone, then why can't I be with you? What's the point of being rich, of being powerful, if you still can't do what you want? If you're forced to do things you don't want to do just to keep your status or power, then aren't you just a slave to those things? My parents think I don't know better because I'm young, but just because I'm young doesn't mean I'm wrong. Or are your concerns different? Is there something else on your mind?" Horace shook his head and said, "I'm not afraid of anything else, not my parents, not hardship or struggle, but I'm afraid that one day I will be your regret." Aisha smiled as she caressed the young man's face with her hand. "As long as you love me the way that you do, I will never regret being with you." The two kids smiled as they finished pouring their hearts out to each other. It would be a while before they got to spend time with one another again. Eventually the two left, and both received a key additional to the one they had bought because they both had made purchases in the gift shop. Mere moments after the duo left, Lex arrived back at the inn. He took in a deep breath, and after holding it in for a few seconds, let out a relieved sigh. "The air is so much better here," Lex commented to the flying hologram around him. "Living at the inn is fine, but what will you do about your family? The only reason there is any focus on me at all is because of Marlowe. I'll wait till he returns and have him clear everything up. Once the focus is off of me, I'll think of something. I don't want to introduce them to cultivation till I'm strong enough to protect them." "Makes sense," Mary said, nodding. "I see my MP has gone up again. What did I miss while I was gone?" Mary summoned Velma, who gave Lex a detailed report of Horace and Aisha. She did not get any additional information about them because only Lex could see his guest statuses, but Lex was sure that there was more than met the eye with the teenagers, especially considering that Aisha left a tab of 10,855 MP. Lex would not have access to that MP till she actually used it up, but her balance would be saved and she could use it at any time. When he learned about their flying adventures he was slightly surprised, and then relieved to hear about the fact that they could not enter the greenhouse even while flying. It would take someone who had a deep understanding of arrays to maneuver through the forest. Lex also had some ideas when he thought of his guests flying around the inn. Using the design interface he added a few permanent clouds in the sky, and introduced a looping air current. If his guests ever flew, they could ride the air current and it would be like a ride. Having a few clouds in the air would also add a little more variety. He also decided to introduce a few more animals and birds. Lovebirds, pigeons and peacocks appeared magically throughout the inn. But he wasn't done yet. He created a small, crystal-clear lake near the recovery room and introduced some cute-looking fish. He didn't know many fish except for goldfish, and would need to research about which would be a good addition to his lake. For now the lake was small and shallow, as he didn't have much space, but in the future he planned on expanding it. He placed a rowboat in the lake, and then smiled to himself. If the two teenagers came back for another date, at least they would have a few more things to do. All the upgrades cost him 1500 MP, but it was totally worth it. Lex could not help but imagine himself bringing a girl to the inn for a date in the future, unaware that he wore a silly grin on his face. Everyone who saw him could guess exactly what the innkeeper was thinking, and resisted the urge to facepalm. Chapter 73 The Reclamation has begun. Once Lex was satisfied with his changes in regards to making a dating spot, he turned his attention back to the inn. Currently of his rooms, 2 were still booked under Bautet and Falak's name, 1 was booked by Hugo and 1 was booked by Alexander. That left only 1 regular room free which he was planning on booking for himself in the short term, but he didn't want to leave the inn with no free rooms available. He spent 1000 MP to buy 2 regular rooms, but instead of the first floor with the rest of the rooms, he placed them alone in separate parts of the inn. He got this idea when he thought about Helen, who seemed to want to stay away from everyone. A secluded room would award her and anyone else who wanted it with their privacy. Lex asked Velma to ask Helen if she'd like to shift her room to one of the secluded ones. Once that was done, he booked the room for himself for a week. Like regular guests he had to pay 50 MP per day for the room, but since the profit from each room was also 50 MP he basically suffered no loss. It was a strange loophole which would allow him to have a room for himself at the inn forever, but the downside was he would have 1 less room for his guests. He teleported to the room directly and lay down on the bed. He was exhausted, more mentally than physically. He went through all the things that he needed to do in his head. Bastet's and Falak's rooms only had a few more days until their reservation was over, which would free up 2 of his rooms. It was disappointing. Lex was hoping to get closer to them, but probably for the best as well since his cultivation was too low. Speaking of cultivation, Lex let out a sigh and picked himself off the bed. Reluctantly he spent another 1500 MP and bought the training room, leaving him with a total of 16 MP left. He thought about where to place it. He didn't want to put it close to the meditation room or cultivation room as he wanted to keep traffic in those places at a minimum. After thinking for a short while, he created a walkway near the manor that led towards the main gate. When he was satisfied with the distance, he put the training room at the end of the path. He decided that all future additions to the inn would be close together. In the future he would eventually form a street with all his main attractions on both ends. Maybe if the inn grew big enough, he would redesign it to the shape of a town. The training room was a plain-looking, square building. On the inside it was well lit despite the lack of any windows, and had a wooden floor. There were 5 wooden dummies in the shape of humans standing on the far end, 5 wooden dummies in the shape of wolves on his right and 5 wooden dummies in the shape of giant birds on his left. He set the price for the training room at 200 MP with a profit of 100 MP, and became his own first customer. He needed to exhaust himself continuously for his body to adapt to his cultivation, and could no longer afford to laze around. He started his combat training fighting against one human dummy for now. He could select the strength of the attacking dummy all the way to the peak of chi training, but for now settled for the dummy being slightly stronger than himself. He also had the option to use wooden weapons, but settled for hand-to-hand combat. Even now he was not actually combat trained, but this training dummy would automatically train him. Somewhere on Vegas Minima, 2 men stood with arms folded in front of a small team of soldiers. The soldiers all had their guns pointed towards the 2 men, yet it was the team of soldiers who were more anxious. The soldiers were all on various levels of chi training, while the 2 men were in the foundation realm. The soldiers had no way of knowing how strong the 2 men really were, but it was fair to say that the soldiers basically stood no chance of winning a fight. At most, they would be able to injure or wound the 2 men. "I'm going to ask you one last time," said one of the 2 men, his voice full of suppressed rage, "where did you get that ring?" One of the soldiers was wearing a gold ring on his hand, with a ruby carved in the shape of a dragon on it. The man speaking was Brother Chen, and the reason he had his arms folded was to keep himself from attacking the soldiers and ripping them limb from limb. The ring used to belong to Brother Chen's father, but after his father passed away his sister took it and started wearing it on a chain around her neck. The 2 soldiers had been searching for their lost caravan since they had returned from the inn, with no luck. Their tracks had been destroyed and there was no sign of them anywhere. Despite searching for days the 2 had no luck, right up until they ran into these soldiers while scavenging in the ruins of an old town. Meeting unfamiliar survivors was always a risky business on Vegas Minima, as humans were just as dangerous as zombies, if not more. These soldiers however attracted the 2 men's attention because of their unusually neat gear as well as advanced weapons. They even handled themselves with a coordination that spoke of military training. Such things were so rare that Brother Chen and Blaine had never encountered them their entire lives. This was because there was no actual military to speak of. Each settlement only had a ragtag bunch of people who had somehow managed to raise their cultivation. When they approached to make inquiries, both of them immediately recognized the ring. That's when the confrontation started. "I'm telling you, I bought it at the reclamation outpost," the man spoke, hiding the nervousness in his voice. Despite the fear he felt, his training prevented him from backing down. "This land is being reclaimed by the Jotun Empire, and all settlements and survivors are being relocated. Since you have not encountered the *T, Brother Chen roared. "Lily would never sell her ring, and I've never heard of this Jotun Empire. This is your last warning, tell me how you got the ring or I won't bother being polite with you anymore." The soldiers tightened their position and kept their aim, ready for combat at any moment. "I'm telling you, follow us to the reclamation outpost and you can see for yourself. A new country is being founded on this land, reclamation work has begun. In the future you will be citizens of the Jotun Empire, but if you dare to attack soldiers of the Empire then despite your cultivation you will not be spared." Blaine and Brother Chen shared a look, as if unsure whether to believe the soldier or not. A country being formed? That was the most ridiculous thing he'd ever heard. No one had the strength to fight off the zombie hordes that would be attracted to such a massive gathering of people. Under normal circumstances they would have already labeled these soldiers as liars and attacked them, yet these circumstances were anything but normal. The 2 had just returned from a mystical land that could transport guests from all over the universe, and met the most ridiculously powerful people. If that were possible, a country being formed didn't seem so far-fetched. The question now was, should they follow the soldiers to confirm their stories? If they were lying, the 2 would no doubt be led to a trap that would spell their doom. But the 2 had golden keys that would allow them to escape any trap, so they were considering it. Eventually Blaine was the one who spoke. "All right then, take us to the reclamation outpost you're talking of. But know this, if you're lying then even if we're unable to escape, we have more than enough ways to kill you. The soldiers finally relaxed a little at hearing the news. The captain of this squad, who had been speaking with Brother Chen earlier, took out a transponder and said, "Home base, this team Reclamation Team 6, we have found 2 Foundation Realm survivors. Requesting immediate extraction, over. Copy that Reclamation Team, a slingshot is on the way, over." The soldier put the communication device away and looked back at the 2 angry men. "There will be some paperwork when you enter the outpost, and you'll need to fill in your data. If the person you're looking for, this Lily, has been to the reclamation outpost, then her data should also be in the database. You'll be able to contact her from there." The 2 nodded, but still kept their guard up. The story these soldiers were telling was too fantastical. They had spent their entire lives, fighting and running, with only very little time spent in settlements because of how rare they were. Now they were being told that an entire country was being established. Despite their recent experiences, they found it a little hard to believe. Chapter 74 First Trial. Lex continued to fight with the training dummy for hours. After his initial burst of energy, he stopped trying to learn combat from it and simply just focused on survival. Every now and again he'd take a break due to exhaustion, but after lying down for around 20 minutes in the training room he'd get back up again. By evening he was so physically drained that he decided to end it for the day. He teleported to his room and drew himself a bath, falling asleep almost the instant he lay down in the tub. Only a few moments later, he disappeared from the bathtub and reappeared in the white room where he first cultivated. Even though he was already asleep, a sedative was injected into his arm to ensure he did not wake up during the process. Instead of tubes connecting to his body like last time, a metallic helmet was attached to his head which began softly vibrating. The first procedure he underwent affected his body, while the second one would affect his spirit. The third would affect his soul, and the final procedure would merge his body, soul and spirit into one entity that had the characteristics of all 3. After the 4th procedure was complete, Lex would finally gain control of his cultivation and would have to consciously cultivate to grow his strength. That, however, was a matter for a later time. William Ben then, for the first time in many years, woke up without the sensation of pain in his body. It was so surreal that initially he did not even realize he was awake and that this was not a dream. When he finally did realize what was happening, he raised his arm and looked at it in disbelief. He pinched himself, just to ensure this was real, and when he felt the sharp sensation of pain run through his body he did not wince but instead laughed. He felt light as a feather, and in better health than even when he was young. His cultivation had regressed, yes, but with his resources it would take him no time at all to restart. He exited the recovery pod, RP, and found Hugo patiently waiting for him on the side. "How do you feel?" the man asked. "Like a young man," Will replied, jumping onto the ground. Then, so amused by the sensation, he jumped a few more times to test his body. His back wasn't jolted by the shock of the movement, his knees didn't hurt and his muscles didn't ache. This truly was much better than he even hoped for. "Come, show me around this place," Will said, as he exited the room. A part of the soul contract for Hugo was to explore whatever the golden key led to, but afterwards he would become Will's bodyguard. Hugo's temperament and experience didn't really make him suitable as a bodyguard, but he was strong enough for the job and that's all that really mattered. "This place has changed somewhat," Hugo commented, looking at the small lake outside the recovery room, RR. "I think it would be better if we let the staff show us around." With that, he called for Gerard to give him and the old man a tour. Gerard showed up driving the golf cart, secretly quite satisfied with the opportunity to drive this vehicle around. "This lake is for resting, and for fishing," Gerard commented as he began his tour. "The innkeeper is usually busy, off visiting other worlds, but every time he returns he improves the inn to better cater to his guests. This lake is one of his newer additions to the inn's environment, but he has not fallen behind in adding new services for his guests as well." Gerard drove them around to the training room, the meditation room, the forest and finally the mystery trial. Along the way they encountered Helen as well, who was surrounded by peacocks. Will asked about her but Gerard commented that he is not at liberty to discuss other guests. Gerard did let him know that if he was interested he could go and talk to her, but will put it off for later. He was curious about the mystery trial and decided that he would enter, but decided to wait till he saw the gift shop. As expected, he was very interested in the items he saw there. He had no use for the zombie cores as he was not a body cultivator, but he knew their value. Besides that, Botlam Dew attracted his attention and he directly bought 10 bottles. He also bought 7 golden keys and a Saturn cake. With that he was quite satisfied. "Would you happen to have any water affinity cultivation techniques?" he asked Gerard. The fact that they were not shown in the gift shop did not mean they weren't available, however he was destined to be disappointed. Unfortunately, at the moment we do not have any. Perhaps I can forward your request to the innkeeper the next time he returns. No need to trouble the innkeeper, Will said cheerily. He would have been happy if he could find a cultivation technique here. He expected it to be better than whatever he could find on Earth, yet he was not disappointed by the lack of one. It would not be troublesome for him to find one on his own. Once he was done seeing everything, Will retired to Hugo's room where he set the cake and invited the bodyguard to have some as well. The two ate in silence. For Hugo, it was simply a delicious cake, but as Will had dropped his cultivation and was no longer even in chi training, he lost himself in euphoria. It was not a physical sensation, as if it was like a drug giving him pleasure, but it brought his mental state to a peak, and slowly he went through all his pleasant memories. At some point, the man dozed off and took a short nap. He woke up completely refreshed and feeling good. Hugo returned back to Earth and summoned all my children. Tell them they need to be physically present when I return. Also, summon Hera as well. It is time I let her know the worth of her gamble. Also, contact Bluebird. I want to view their collection of cultivation techniques, but also tell my butler to invite a few private dealers so that I can have a wider pool to choose from. What will you do? Me? I'm very curious about the mystery trial. Gerard said that there is a reward if I'm able to pass. Since my first visit is free, and it's not dangerous, I see no reason why I can't visit it. Hugo nodded, and left the inn. This time, he didn't get a golden key since he himself didn't actually purchase anything or avail any services. Once Hugo left, Will walked towards the trial. A large metal door awaited him, giving off an ancient feel. It was as if the door had existed since the beginning of time, and had trapped behind it an ancient power. As if the door knew his intention, it slowly opened, revealing a dark hall behind it. Will mustered up his courage and stepped through, and was taken aback by the sudden change. The moment he stepped through the threshold of the door, his environment changed. He found himself dressed formally, surrounded by various dignitaries and noblemen at a ball. He did not recognize anyone there, and yet he knew everyone. To be clear, he had never met anyone here before in his life, but somehow he knew the name and details of everyone here. He also found that he knew that he was not here as William Ben then, but under the guise of another strange identity. The ball was being hosted by the king of whichever country this was, and everyone was speculating as to the reason for the ball. Somehow, Will knew that his trial was to befriend as many people as possible, and learn the truth of what was happening behind the scenes. This was a strange trial, and completely different from what Will had been expecting. Yet on some level, it made sense. If Will had to define his strongest ability, he would say that it was networking. Despite his feeble cultivation and illness, he boasted a large financial empire and strong contacts in both the mortal and cultivation world. He knew how to win hearts, and how to influence people when he wanted something. Since Will knew the details of his trial, he saw no reason to delay. He approached a middle-aged old man who was sporting a rather handsome handlebar mustache, and said, "Bernie. It's good to see you here. I was rather worried you wouldn't be able to make it due to the whole smuggler business." The man Bernie recognized Will, and laughed as he reached out for a hug. Will thought everything was going well, until he saw a red-colored +1 appearing above Bernie's head. When Will focused on it, he learned that Will had negatively impacted Bernie's mood by reminding him of something unpleasant. Although the middle-aged man didn't let it show, he did not appreciate Will's comment. A smuggling ring had been caught by the local authorities in the area under his charge, and was now under investigation to see if he had any connections to the smuggling ring. While such a small incident would not affect their relationship, nurturing positive feelings was the most basic rule of networking. It seems Will had made a very basic mistake. Will continued to talk to the man, and realized that his attention would somehow be naturally attracted to small gestures the man made, or minor details about his behavior. When he associated those gestures or behaviors with the blue numbers that would represent positive feelings or red that would represent negative, Will found himself learning a bit about how to anticipate the other's reaction. Soon, he found himself experimenting with the others as well as he tried to charm them. He was already good at socializing and grasping at people's hearts, but now he found his skill improving. Soon, he forgot all about the purpose of his trial, and was more absorbed in improving his networking and reading people as much as possible. Chapter 75 Getting Serious. As soon as Lex woke up, his mind was clear, without the usual grogginess that comes after a long nap. He noticed that he was not in his bathtub, the last place he remembered being. He was in the familiar white room. A grin painted his face when he realized what had happened and jumped off the table, ready to test out his increased strength. The focus of the second procedure was his spirit, but naturally an increase in his cultivation realm would also increase his basic physical capabilities. He felt stronger, but he would need to test out his strength in the training room to get a clear understanding of how much stronger he really was. The change that felt most obvious to him was his mind. He could not say that he had gotten smarter, but that he could do more. An easy way to explain it was that if Lex had to do a math equation mentally that would take him 5 seconds to solve, he could now solve it one. His mental capability had improved, but if Lex did not know how to solve that math equation in the first place, no amount of improvements would change that. Although, perhaps he'd be able to learn how to solve the equation with greater ease now. He should test out the theory by going over some of his old college material. Since he'd forgotten almost all of it, it could be treated as if he was learning that stuff for the first time. It would give him a decent benchmark to test how much his learning capability had improved. Naturally, there was more to his improvements than just that. With an increase in his spirit, he would be more resistant to spirit attacks or invasions, and would more easily be able to see through illusions. It would take time and experimentation to learn exactly what else his increased spirit allowed him to do. "Congratulations," said Mary, appearing before him. Something that surprised Lex was that Mary had changed her clothes, and now appeared to be wearing the white taekwondo uniform. "Thank you, I'm relieved that the upgrade happened. I don't know how much longer I could have taken getting beaten up by those dummies." "Haha, your training is far from over, young man. After your latest increase in cultivation, your spirit is unstable. Before you can increase your cultivation again, you need to wait for your spirit to stabilize. You can speed up that process by meditating, so that'll be your next task. For some people, that's even worse than getting beaten up by a dummy." Lex groaned, thinking about that. He had never tried meditating before, but he couldn't imagine it would be easy. He checked how much his next upgrade would be, and predictably the price had increased to 10,000 MP. He needed to figure out a way to increase his income. "Mary, how can I increase the number of guests that I receive? My income is too low, it can't keep up with my expenses." "If you want to increase your income, your focus should be on completing quests. You haven't even started the farming quest yet, let alone the one for repeat guests. Completing quests will directly help you improve the inn and increase your authority. The greater your authority, the more things you can do." Lex cursed, he had completely forgotten about getting the seeds. He would return to Earth as soon as possible to figure that out. But the other quest? "But how am I supposed to get repeat guests? The only thing I can do there is wait for them to come back." "That's too passive." "Yes, some guests will eventually come back, ultimately fulfilling the requirements for the quest, but if that's all it took, then why would the inn give you the quest? You have to be more active, and figure out how to bring those customers back. You always wait for the system or the inn to give you things, but never take initiative to figure things out on your own. The Marlowe quest was the only one you put any effort into at all. Be more imaginative." "To be honest, this quest was so easy. I don't want to give you any bad ideas, but all you needed to do was find some poor sap on Earth, give them keys and make them come back to the inn repeatedly. In fact, you earned a decent amount of money, you could have even paid them directly to buy things from the inn to complete the quest." Lex frowned, realizing that he really had been too nonchalant about the quests. Mary was right, his quest that he had been treating as difficult had such an easy loophole. He pulled up his status to look at his ongoing quests. Quests. Having a guest come once can be an accident, only repeat guests can reflect an institution's prestige. Have 5 individual repeat guests. Progress? Repeated guest, Hugo. Host has encountered a planet extremely suitable for finding guests. Build a connection to Dunya. With a garden available in your backyard, it's time to improve the quality of your food. Grow spiritual vegetables for the inn's kitchen. He was happy to see that Hugo returning counted him as a repeat guest. He was expecting Alexander to return soon, and those 2 teenage lovebirds definitely planned on using this place as a rendezvous, but it was unknown when exactly they would return. He could wait a little to see if he had any repeat guests, but at the moment he was inclined towards using the loophole Mary told him of. Of course, he had to carefully plan out how to do it so that he would not be connected to the inn. He was already surprised at the extent of surveillance he had encountered on Earth. As for going to Dunya, forget it. The 2 planets he had gone to were only 1 star, and yet he had nearly died on both of them. There was no way in hell he would be going to Dunya right now, even his brain tumor did not make him stupid enough to do something like that. The easiest one for now was the vegetable one. He would complete it as soon as possible. "By the way, while you were asleep, Will recovered and has entered the mystery trail. He has been in there for about an hour now." "Oh, interesting. Is there any way we can see what his trial is?" "No, but you can ask him about it when he's done. I think it might not be a bad idea for you to go through the trial once as well." "I'll think about it, but not now. I'm returning to Earth to buy some seeds, keep me updated in case he leaves the trial." Lex exited the White Room and returned directly to Earth. He took out his phone and turned it on, only to receive a dozen or so notifications. He directly ignored most of them, responding only to Moon and Larry. He told his youngest sister by telling her he'd be going on a trip for work, so he'd be outside the service area, so if she is unable to reach him she should not be alarmed. He messaged Larry thanking him for calling Bluebird, and then messaged him that he dropped out of Marlowe's class and that he'd be leaving for a while. He googled the closest farmer's market and went there directly and bought a few packets of every kind of seed they had. Then he put up an ad on eBay for 4 people to help him make a special delivery. He only listed the payment for the ad as $50 per person. He wanted to attract the kind of people who would not ask too many questions and were desperate for cash. He would check the response on the ad tomorrow and promptly return to the inn. Of course, before returning to the inn he went to a discreet location without any cameras. He didn't want to leave behind any evidence of him appearing and disappearing, especially since he was walking around without his Bluebird token. He didn't want his location being tracked. He returned to the inn and teleported directly to the greenhouse. The gardener had done some decent work, and prepared some support beams for the vines to grow on. He divided the area into 4 different sections, 1 for vines, 1 for precious herbs, 1 for trees and 1 for the vegetables that Lex would bring. So far the growth was not too prominent, but it had barely been a day. It would take some time at least for the cuttings to regain their vigor. Lex handed over the seeds and was about to discuss the growth plan with the gardener when Velma appeared beside him, telling him that Helen was asking for him. Apparently she had an important request. Chapter 76 Morrison Family. Lex walked to the young lady who always seemed to be surrounded by animals. Currently Helen had a rabbit in her lap, a pigeon on her shoulder and several peacocks surrounding her. Her affinity with animals was remarkably high. "I see you are enjoying the company of our new residents," Lex said with a smile. "I was told you had a request. What may I do for you?" Helen, who was sitting on the grass, looked up at the mysterious innkeeper. Although her mood had been down lately, the innkeeper somehow always had a warm and welcoming feeling around him. Just his presence was so relaxing. He would make a good body pillow, she thought to herself, before turning her attention to the matter at hand. "It's an unusual request, I hope you don't mind," she warned hesitantly. "Not at all. Please, let me know what's on your mind and I'll see what I can do about it. I noticed one of your new guests earlier, and recognized him, William Bentham, CEO of Bentham Corp. I'm sure there is no reason he would recognize me, but I was worried that you may have other guests who might recognize me in the future, which might cause some problems. Is there any way for you to hide my identity? If not, can you give me a mask? I don't want to spend my time hiding in my room." This was an unusual request, but made Lex realize that this was another aspect of the inn he had not anticipated. In the future, guests may come to the inn to hide from their enemies, in which case it would be important to hide their identities. Something Leal wearing a mask would not fool everyone, since not everyone could have the Clark Kent effect. He needed a better solution. "I suggest you tell her to wait a bit. Once you unlock the inn prestige for guests, hiding their identities will naturally be a perk for them," said Mary, who was still dressed in her taekwondo uniform. "Your uniform looks nice," he commented mentally, before looking towards Helen and saying, "I am working on something for that. It should be available for you by tomorrow. Until then I can ask Velma to bring you a mask, or you can rest in your room." "Thank you," Helen responded. After that Lex teleported to his room and looked at his system. Only a few days were left till the end of his contract with Velma and Gerard. He wanted to wait as long as he could before he changed their status to permanent, but at this point he guessed it would be better to just change it lest he miss the deadline by accident. Paying a hefty 4,000 MP, Lex changed their status to permanent, leaving him with only 3316 MP. He was once again feeling poor. The innkeeper let out a sigh before he sat cross-legged on his bed and started trying to meditate. He had never done it before and had no idea how to successfully meditate, and to be honest didn't really want to try either. But he still had to do it. He wanted to upgrade his cultivation as quickly as possible, and with his life on the line he had to be a little more disciplined. While Lex was learning the art of meditation, Will finally exited the trial. It was fair to say he had failed spectacularly. Till the end of the trial he did not learn anything about the true purpose behind the ball at all. He did however learn a lot about the different ways in which people behave. When up against an ordinary man, it was easy to read what he was thinking or feeling simply from his facial expressions and body language. Against the cream of the crop of an entire nation, however, it was much harder. They had a mastery over their body and expressions, and only showed what they wanted the other to see. They could be smiling and laughing, but cursing you on the inside and you would never know. In fact, Will encountered a particular lady who took up most of his time in the trial. He was ashamed to admit that he had ended up spending a good amount of time flirting with the woman. The interesting thing was, when confronted or even insulted, the woman's impression of Will increased. Of course, not all insults improved her impression, and some just plain made her mad. But within a certain boundary, the more aggressive Will was, the more she appreciated him internally, but externally no one could tell. He also met a rather interesting fellow who, without letting Will realize, got Will to disclose a few of his own secrets, or rather the secrets of the character he was playing. When Will realized what was happening, he was quite shook. It then dawned on him that while he was trying to gauge others, others were doing the same to him, perhaps with even a greater mastery than himself. It was an important lesson. All in all, even though Will failed the trial, he found the experience very insightful. He would take some time to digest everything he had learned and then return. With that done, he left for Earth. He was about to be a very busy man once again, and he could feel the excitement coursing through his veins. Alexander got off a space shuttle and onto the red planet. He did not need a spacesuit, as the atmosphere on Mars had been completely altered using arrays and technology to make it suitable for human habitation. His travel time from Earth to Mars was one of the quickest ever recorded, one because the two planets happened to be near each other in their orbit, and two because he had used hundreds of spirit stones to speed up his flight. He was normally not impatient, but this matter was important. "Alexander, welcome home," said a well-dressed man who approached him with a smile. His name was Percy, and was one of Alexander's personal assistants. "News about you is still suppressed, so this is the only welcoming committee for you this time around, I'm afraid." "It doesn't matter. Take me home directly, I need to meet with my father." "Of course," replied Percy, and led him to his car. Alexander was silent all the way home, something unusual Percy thought, but then this was an unusual time. Percy of course did not know that Alexander had anticipated the assassination attempt, so he thought the young man was in a bad mood because of it. His home was surprisingly not a large mansion, but was a small, single-story building surrounded by a vast forest. The Morrison family home was a very private building, and they almost never received guests. Other than a few, very old and trustworthy staff members, everyone in the building was a Morrison. The first thing Alexander did when he got home was meet his mother, to assure her that he was unhurt from the recent incident, before quickly entering his father's study room. Two young men who bore a strong resemblance to Alexander were sitting in the room chatting when he arrived. If anyone saw the three of them together, they would assume they were brothers, but no, they were son, father and grandfather. Alexander's father and grandfather both had a very high cultivation level, which drastically slowed down their aging process. "Oh, my dear Alexander, you've grown so much since I last saw you. Give your grandfather a hug." Alexander quickly and unceremoniously rejected his grandfather. Who the hell was he kidding? His grandfather was at the peak of golden core in body cultivation. The last time Alexander hugged him, he broke a few ribs. "I see you've gotten a new tattoo," Alexander said, looking at the crow on his grandfather's neck. Unlike the other two, Alexander's grandfather was covered in tattoos from head to toe. They came in every shape and size you could imagine. Alexander remembered that once when he was very young he played a game of tic-tac-toe with his grandfather on one of his biceps using an ink gun. The evidence of that game was still there. "Don't encourage him," said Rorik, Alexander's father. "Your grandmother has introduced the old man to anime. You don't know how much effort it took me to stop him from getting a ninjutsu tattooed on himself. Unfortunately, I was not able to stop him from altering some of the family spirit techniques." Alexander's grandfather, Brandon, grinned and activated a technique to show him when Rorik was referring to. Alexander immediately dismissed the chain made of fire that appeared in Brandon's hand. His focus was on the golden, glowing aura around his grandfather as well as his suddenly spiked hair. He was both impressed and embarrassed. Alexander shook his head in defeat and quickly took out the Tier 4 zombie core and threw it towards his grandfather. He knew that unless he intervened, the two would keep antagonizing each other. His grandparents were both very free-spirited people. They wore their hearts on their sleeve, weren't afraid to show exactly how they felt and did exactly what they wanted. His parents were the exact opposite. They were extremely formal and disciplined, and paid great attention to propriety. Other than when they talked about cultivation, they never got along with each other, mostly because it was his grandfather's passion to irritate his father. When Brandon held the zombie core, his casual smile completely disappeared, and he looked at the item in his hand with doubtful eyes. "I think you should listen to what happened on Earth. This will affect all our plans." Chapter 77 Harry Styles. "Wait, so you've launched a hunt for Marlowe?" asked Alexander. "Yes, when you told us to look at Marlowe's recent actions we noticed that he disappeared shortly before the assassination. We did not suspect his involvement at all until then. It's a good thing you tipped us off. We haven't started looking for him directly, but we've already hinted to a few organizations on Earth that we want to know his whereabouts. They've already begun their hunt. It won't be long before we find him." No. He was not involved at all. That's not why I told you to look for him. I already know where he is. I wanted to know about his recent actions because I wanted to know who could hurt him so badly." This is what happened. Alexander began explaining to his family where he saw Marlowe, unaware that his casual remark had inadvertently caused the mysterious innkeeper to move out of his apartment and escape Earth. The next day Lex woke up, unrest and groggy. He was not in his room, but in the meditation room instead. Yesterday he had tried meditating, but found he could not stop himself from having random thoughts. After trying to avoid daydreaming for 30 minutes, he had accidentally fallen asleep. When he woke up, Mary told him that meditating would be harder for him than others because his spirit was currently unstable, but that was exactly why it was so important that he keep trying. After another short period with no success, it occurred to him to try the meditation room. The change was drastic, and he immediately felt much calmer once inside. Lex was not sure exactly what state constituted as meditation, as he never fully went without a few random thoughts crossing his mind, but he had a firmer grasp on his thoughts at least. Still, it got boring pretty quickly. However, the young innkeeper persevered. At some point he had once again fallen asleep without realizing, and was only waking up now. He got up and stretched, cracking his various joints as he stood up. Sleeping whilst in a sitting pose was not comfortable at all, even with his improved physique. He had breakfast in his room and then teleported back to Earth. It was time to complete his quest. He made his way to the particular coffee shop he had requested as the meeting location on his eBay ad. After exchanging various messages with the people who contacted him and waiting for a few hours, he finally selected 4 men to help him complete his task. 3 of them were older, and wore old, worn-out clothes. The 4th looked like a teenager, and though he was also wearing old clothes, looked very presentable. Your task is simple, and should not take more than 20 minutes. I'm shooting a film and you'll be helping me during a scene. You'll all wear blindfolds, and I will lead you somewhere. I'll give you all a check which you will have to hand over to someone in exchange for a bottle of Botlam Dew. Once you've received the bottle, I'll bring you back. We may shoot the scene a couple of times. Once I'm satisfied with the result, I'll pay you all in cash. The 4 men didn't seem too bothered by his instructions and were just impatient to get started. Lex led them to a secluded area in Central Park and handed them all blindfolds and handed them signed blank checks, as well as a golden key each once they were wearing the blindfolds. Action, Lex yelled loudly while pretending to record them from his phone. He helped them activate the keys, and they were all teleported to the inn. Lex used his control over the inn to teleport them directly to the gift shop. He didn't want anyone to see what was happening. Velma greeted them all, and one by one they handed over the check and asked for a bottle of Bottom Dew. Once they all had their bottles, he ejected them from the inn. When they all returned, they all received a golden key each, for buying something from the inn. This way Lex didn't need to buy them for them himself again, which was a hefty cost. The base price for a golden key was 100 MP, but every time he bought the key again during the same week the price would double. This double price wouldn't count if a guest would buy a key themselves from the gift shop, but for Lex buying these 4 keys had already cost him 1500 MP. Fortunately, even though the checks these 4 people used to buy the Botlam Dew were from Lex's own account, the system did not discriminate and accepted the MP, so he recovered 480 MP. With one successful transaction, he told them they were going to shoot one more time and quickly repeated the process. As soon as the 4 returned back to Earth, he got the notification for quest completion. Quest complete. The host's rewarded is being calculated. No upgrade applied. Reward de. Reward, midnight in Prestia. Remarks: if you put in all your effort, work hard, and focus with all your might, somehow you might succeed at being even lazier than you are. New quest: hire a permanent employee. Quest details: due to the system's serious doubt in the host, no restrictions are being placed on the kind of employee. Please hire anyone who will not somehow harm the inn, and you will be rewarded accordingly. Quest reward: subject to change based on performance. Lex's lips twitched once again at the heavy criticism, but he had come to expect it now. Why was the system so much more annoying than Mary? She was so cute and adorable, the system should be more like her. At least with that out of the way, Lex turned his attention to his actors. He quickly took back the blindfolds, keys and Botlam Dews as the props he had given them and paid them all $50. Some of them tried to argue for more, ready with the intention to create trouble, but Lex was a cultivator now. As soon as he frowned, his intimidating figure promptly shut them up. The last actor, the teenager, didn't leave immediately after receiving his money. He kept staring at Lex for a bit, and just as Lex was ready to brush off any attempts for more money, the kid said, "Your haircut doesn't suit your face." Huh? Lex said, not expecting such a remark. When you get your haircut and the hair is freshly cut, it may not look so bad, but once a few days pass and your hair becomes more natural, the look changes. Your current haircut makes your face look round and bigger than it is. You should try out a different style. If you want, I can cut your hair. Lex smiled, amused at the boy's attempted hustle. "And how much will you charge for the haircut?" he asked, not dismissing the kid immediately. "The first time is free. If you like the haircut, and decide in the future that you want me to continue cutting your hair, you can give me a call. You should also get a shave too while you're at it, by the way. I can tell you shave using a trimmer instead of a blade. That causes your hair to be cut unevenly and doesn't give you a clean look. A close shave will improve your look and make you more presentable. I perform hot towel shaves, which will not only help you relax, it'll completely change the way you feel about shaving." Originally Lex wanted to leave immediately as he was in a hurry to see what the prestige system did. However, the prestige system had been unlocked and implemented, so whether he learnt about it immediately or a little later did not matter. "What's your name, kid?" Lex asked. "Harry, just Harry. I used to go by Harry Styles when I started cutting hair, but I just found out that there's already some guy who goes by that name, so until I think of a better one I just go by Harry." "Alright Harry, I could go for a haircut. Where are we doing this, right here?" "No, I don't have my equipment with me. You'll have to follow me to my apartment. I either do house calls or do my grooming at my apartment." Lex didn't mind, and he liked Harry's enterprising attitude, so he followed him back to his apartment. Harry lived in Harlem, so they had to take the subway, but it did not take too long. Lex walked into the small studio to find a messy but cozy place. In the corner Harry had set a barber's chair in front of a full-sized mirror. Although the place was small, it did not look like something a broke teenager should be able to afford on his own. "This is your apartment alone?" he asked, curious if he shared the place with someone. "Pretty much," he said, gathering his supplies. "How do you afford the rent?" "I cut hair for the whole building," Harry replied casually. "And some of the neighboring buildings as well. Don't underestimate my skill, trust me, you'll look like a whole other person once I'm done with you. Now, have a seat." He dusted the chair and welcomed Lex to sit down as he filled his spray bottle with water. Lex sat, impressed by the child. Now all that was left to see how good he actually was. Chapter 78 Rose Society. Harry wrapped Lex in the barber's cape and sprayed his hair with cool water. "Before I begin, I just want to be sure, you're okay with me styling it as I want, right?" "Yeah, no problem." Harry nodded, and as soon as he began his expression abruptly changed. Lex was staring at the kid in the mirror and saw his focused and serious look as he combed Lex's hair into various styles. Once he decided what he wanted to go with, he started snipping. The teenager was snipping at an even pace, as if he knew exactly how many times he needed to cut in one area and by how much. With his comb in his hand he would measure Lex's hair length and then cut it as was required. After a while Lex stopped paying attention to Harry and just relaxed. For some reason Lex always found the process of getting a haircut very relaxing. The gentle combing, the snipping sound of the scissors, the occasional cool spray of water, all soothed him. Without realizing it, Lex closed his eyes and slowly started meditating. His thoughts didn't wander towards the inn, or his guests, or his cultivation. He was simply existing. The sound of the cutting and the feeling of Harry moving around him kept him from falling asleep, but the gentle rhythm relaxed him. Time passed and eventually Harry finished grooming Lex's hair, but Lex himself was completely unaware and he was already meditating deeply. Harry noticed Lex's peculiar state, but did nothing as he had many customers who had inadvertently fallen asleep while he worked. He took it as a compliment, and was proud of his skills that would allow his customers to enjoy so much. Harry gently took Lex's head and had him rest it backwards on the neck rest to get him ready for the shave. At some point earlier he had placed a face towel under hot running water which he now grabbed using tongs. He placed the towel of his forearm once first, to ensure the temperature was not too hot, then gently placed the towel over Lex's cheeks and neck. The warm, wet towel heated up Lex's face and opened up his pores. The sudden high temperature almost woke Lex from his meditation, but Harry quickly started massaging Lex behind the ears which helped calm him down. After a short while he stopped the massage and prepared the lather, before removing the towel and applying it to Lex's face. Once that was done Harry took out a fresh blade and started to shave Lex. The shave itself did not take too long and once it was done Harry took out another face towel that he had placed in an icebox and put it on Lex's face like he did previously. This time the cold woke Lex up from his meditation, but the man discovered that he was feeling extremely refreshed. He felt even better than after waking up from a short nap, and was genuinely amazed at the experience. He had never gotten someone else to shave him before, but now he could say that the experience wasn't bad. Removing the towel Harry messed up Lex's hair once with his hand, before using a blow-dryer on it. Afterwards he quickly styled it and then retrieved a mirror to show Lex his hair from the back. Lex was surprised by how much he liked the new hairstyle and enjoyed the experience. He decided right there and then, he must hire Harry for his inn. He was sure his guests would enjoy the experience, and even if they didn't he definitely would. You're better than I was expecting, Lex said as he took out another $50 from his wallet. I'm impressed. I said for the first time there's no charge, Harry said, as if very disciplined. Although Lex tried to say it was a tip, the young man was proud and refused to submit. For some reason, that made Lex like him even more. They exchanged contact information so Lex could contact him in the future, but Harry was unaware that Lex was planning on seeing him much sooner than he anticipated. Lex exited the building and returned to the inn from somewhere nearby. He would wait a few hours before secretly sending Harry a platinum key to recruit him so that he does not associate Lex with the inn. Back at the inn he teleported directly to his room and investigated what Prestige did. Prestige gives guests different levels of perks based on how much MP they spend at the inn. Perks at Prestige Level 1. Can receive glasses equipped with Clark Kent effect, only work while at the inn. Perks at Prestige Level 2. Can instantly teleport to the inn from anywhere in the universe once, great for escaping enemies. Perks at Prestige Level 3. Can travel to a world connected to the inn. Raise host authority for higher prestige classes. All guests who arrived at the inn would automatically reach Prestige Level 1, but to reach Level 2 they would need to spend 10,000 MP and then 100,000 MP for Level 3. Since the Prestige system was just unlocked it only just started counting the MP expenditure, and did not count any MP anyone had spent prior to this. Lex was quite happy with this as it gave his guests an incentive to spend more while at his inn. With nothing else to do now Lex really wanted to just relax and game for a bit, but for now he could not let himself relax. Once his cultivation was raised he could afford to take a few more breaks. He promptly returned to the meditation room and spent the next few hours both succeeding and failing at meditation. Once it had been long enough he teleported back to Earth, ready to send Harry the platinum key. Something interesting he learnt was that he did not need to wait for people to use his keys, as long as they were holding them Lex could remotely activate them. This way he would not need to wait for Harry for a few hours or days or weeks like he did with Marlowe. How would he reach Harry's apartment? Of course, the easy way. It was already night so after making sure no one was in the area Lex equipped Icarus wings and quickly flew to Harry's apartment window and snuck in. He had made sure to secretly unlock the window while he was at Harry's apartment. The teenager was asleep at his desk, on his laptop in front of him a video about styling hair was playing. Lex nodded in appreciation at the dedication and dropped the platinum key in the kid's hand before sneaking back out. As much as Lex felt the urge to fly around the city, he knew he would get into trouble so he resisted. As soon as he returned to the inn he mentally activated the platinum key and was once again teleported to the familiar white room. Soon Harry appeared in the room as well, still in a half-asleep state. Drool was dripping down his chin and though he was standing, it looked like he himself was unaware that he was awake now. Lex viewed his status to check for any unexpected information before he began. Name, Harry. Age, 17. Sex, male. Cultivation details. None. Species, human. Remarks, seems extremely ordinary, so already better than the host. Once he was sure all was as it seemed, he was ready for his performance. Welcome, young Harry, to the Midnight Inn, a booming voice shook the poor teenager awake from his reverie. The teenager was alarmed when he realized he was in an unfamiliar place, but before his thoughts could stray further away, his attention was attracted to the man standing in the middle. I am the Innkeeper, and I have summoned you here because I've had an eye on your talent. The universe is a vast place, it would be a shame if your skills would be left unearthed. Lex was using the full might of the host attire on the young man so that he could make a strong impression on him. He did not want to lose another potentially great employee due to carelessness. Hera was still dazed as she stood beside Will, who was welcoming a few guests to his house. Yesterday when she saw him looking so young and energetic she did not recognize him at all. The old man looked as if he had never been sick a day in his life, and as if he were the model for good health. Just as Hera was dealing with the shock of his recovery, the old man introduced her to the world of cultivation. He told her the repayment that he had promised her that was worth much more than money was cultivation, for her and when he came of age, for her son. Since then she had seen countless amazing things, and the old man had already gotten an instructor for her and her son. She had started training her body today, but since she was not too athletic and completely out of shape it was very tough for her. Yet the old man promised that soon, he would help her overcome that barrier. Once the last of the guests entered the room the doors were firmly closed and Will's bodyguard, Hugo, stood at the door. Welcome back ladies and gentlemen, to the Rose Society, where we left off so many unfinished things long ago. I have found for us the path to salvation and redemption. With a wide grin Will took out 7 shining, golden keys from a pouch and started passing them around. Chapter 79 Glamour Sorcerer. Harry was in awe of the man before him, and all the amazing things he told him. Cultivation? Multiple worlds? The whole universe? These things were too vast and vague for him to comprehend, but the one thing he did understand was that this was an amazing opportunity for him. Harry had a hustling attitude. Every minute of every day his mind was either on how to make money or how to improve his skills and make connections. Truth be told, the apartment he was living in wasn't under his name, even though he paid the rent. Harry was an orphan, and at the age of 15 he ran away from his foster home and came to New York. It took him some time, but eventually he worked his way into a decent life. His apartment was under the name of a rich student Harry met at an event at NYU. He liked Harry's skills, and had him cut his hair every 2 weeks. He even did all the paperwork to help Harry get the apartment, though he was very clear about the fact that Harry would have to pay the deposit and rent himself. He was able to achieve all of this because he availed every opportunity that came his way, and he wasn't about to miss this one either. But before he could officially become a member of the Midnight Inn, he had to undergo a test. And what were the details of the test? He had to completely restyle some girl named Velma's hair. Harry was a little nervous as he usually cut men's hair, but he had seen a lot of tutorials online on cutting women's hair. He closed his eyes and took a deep breath, suppressing his nerves. When he opened his eyes again, they were filled with focus and determination. He would not fail. Lex watched as Harry worked. He only set the test that he wanted to have Harry cut some hair. The system decided that the test would be cutting Velma's hair, but just the haircut wasn't enough. It would test various things, such as professionalism, knowledge, skill, Velma's satisfaction, her charm factor, whatever that was, and many more. To be honest, he wanted to use some loopholes and just hire him directly, but the system would never relax its standards for anyone, even its host. The equipment was provided by the inn, and the haircut took place in the White Room. When Harry asked what kind of a look Velma wanted, she said that as she dealt with guests a lot, a formal look is what she wanted. Other than that, she did not have much in mind, as this was literally the first makeover of her very short life and she knew nothing about them. As Harry worked, everyone waited, filled with anticipation. Brother Chen and Blaine had been through a lot the last couple of days. When they reached the reclamation outpost, they were shocked to see that this simple outpost was already bigger than any settlement they had ever seen. They were led to the registration and background check department, where they were questioned by Golden Core cultivators about their past in general, such as if they had any affiliations with other settlements, if they acted against any settlements, and what kind of crimes they had committed. They were hooked up to lie detectors so they could only tell the truth. Fortunately, although the two had killed humans before, it was mostly against bandits and they never attacked settlements for resources or committed heinous crimes. Once their background check was completed and they were approved for registration, they were sent to a rehabilitation and re-education center. The purpose of the Rehabilitation and Re-education Center was to diagnose what mental health issues they had, what disorders they had developed, and determine if they were suitable to join society. The Jotun Empire took it as a foregone conclusion that living their entire lives in survival mode, attacked at every opportunity, all natives of Vigus Minima would have some mental health issues and disorders. Not that they would be discriminated against for having disorders, they would receive the appropriate help. Once they were diagnosed, they eventually learnt why all this was happening. The Jotun Empire was not an empire founded by anyone on Vigus Minima, but was a galactic empire that had many solar systems under their domain. They were in a massive war against demons that spanned the entire known universe. It wasn't just the Jotun Empire that was at war against them, but various other empires, sects, families, organizations, and powers. The war was a complex issue and the two did not get too many details about it, but they were assured that as recognized citizens of the Jotun Empire they would be protected and no longer needed to fight, unless they wanted to. The two could not believe it, and were in shock. They didn't know what their lives would look like now that they had a chance to live peacefully. Before they could wrap their heads around it, they decided to look for their lost caravan. It must be said that the people at the reclamation outpost were extremely organized. As soon as the two provided information about their caravan, they were informed about their whereabouts. The caravan had actually split up once they reached the outpost. The Jotun Empire offered them homes, security and jobs as well as professional training as to how to fit into a peaceful society and live meaningful lives. More than half the caravan took that offer and were relocated off-planet. Among these people was Iris, Blaine's girlfriend. Others, who had a strong hatred for zombies which were identified as lesser demons, joined the war efforts. Lily, Brother Chen's sister, was among those people. The two soldiers looked at each other with mixed feelings as they knew that soon they would have to split up. For now, however, they decided to go find Lily as she was nearby. She no doubt thought that Brother Chen was dead, and they had to let her know they were alive, as well as about the inn. Even with the Jotun Empire bringing change to Vigus Minima, it was true that the Midnight Inn would be the best way to raise their strength. The Rose Society was an organization Will and his high school friends had formed. It was meant to signify that they looked harmless like a beautiful rose, but their thorns could cut if you try to pluck them. It represented a fanciful dream, but to them it was their lives' work. The cultivation resources of Earth were limited, that much was evident, but how exactly were they limited? The actual fact of the matter was, there was an abundance of cultivation materials for cultivators at the Foundation realm and below. However, the real scarcity was for golden core cultivators. In fact, most of them never make any progress after entering the golden core realm at all. Yet because the world was controlled by these cultivators, a resource shortage was artificially created so that fewer people would ever even reach the golden core realm. The Rose Society was supposed to be a secret organization that worked behind the scenes to slowly take control of the resources from the few. Even though golden core cultivators were the strongest, it wasn't as if they could stay on their farms, mines and manufacturing plants all the time, or that they had a good or even adequate understanding of business. These things were managed by those at lower cultivations, so taking control of the flow of resources slowly but subtly was entirely possible. Yet the dream was cut short because the society could not garner enough momentum and keep their activities secretive enough. Now, however, Will wanted to restart the organization. The 6 other members as well as Hera looked at Will curiously, wondering what he wanted to do. "Thank you for trusting me," Will said with a smile. "I know you all have questions. But this is not the place to answer them. To get your answers, we have to go to another place." Will smiled as he picked up the golden key and activated it. "If what you're saying is true," said Brandon with a rare, serious expression, "then this truly will change a lot of things. We should go investigate this Midnight Inn with you. I'll call your grandma over and we'll leave once she arrives." Alexander and Rorik nodded and began waiting. Everyone in the room was filled with anticipation. Somewhere in a forest in Nibiru, a giant turtle finally ended its daily tasks and stopped to take a rest. Unexpectedly, in a rare occurrence, the turtle actually fell asleep. It had recently experienced a breakthrough in its cultivation, so its control over its spirit energy was shaky, and in one of those moments where its spirit energy broke free of its control, it was attracted towards a golden key it had placed in its shell, activating it. "But Mom, I was only playing," cried Russian Princess 77, but her mother would have none of it. "I've told you a million times, you're not allowed to touch the Book of Prophecies. Now hand over the key and go to your room." "Never," the young girl exclaimed and started running and laughing. "I told you to hand it over," the mother roared as she took off her slipper in an experienced manner and threw it towards her fleeing daughter. Like a homing beacon it followed Russian Princess 77 until it gave her a solid whack on her bum. The girl fell over, accidentally releasing some spirit energy and activating the key. Somewhere on a space shuttle near Vegas Minima, a lone man was meditating in a prison cell. His body was impaled with various chains that restricted the flow of spirit energy, yet the man did not seem to mind. The pain in his body did not torment him, it only served to strengthen his will and solidify his focus. Suddenly, a floating, golden door appeared in the cell in front of him, offering him freedom. The man did not even hesitate. Before anyone on the ship could realize what was happening, the door was gone and the prisoner along with it. Lex was grinning as he read the notification. "Quest complete. The host's rewarded is being calculated. Reward upgraded for completing the quest in less than 24 hours. Reward upgraded for locating employee with unique talent. Reward rank, B. Reward, heritage for glamour sorcerer, given directly to employee, 1 barber shop, 1 employee residence, 1000 MP, event manager panel." The little innkeeper was too excited about his recent success, with no idea that he was about to welcome more guests than he'd ever had before. Chapter 80 Eccentric Guests. Lex tried to view the details for Glamour Sorcerer but unfortunately all he could see was that sorcery was a different school of power elevation, increasing one's strength, than cultivation. It would be too awkward if Lex, as the innkeeper and his boss, had to ask Harry what it was, which is why he would have to investigate in some other way. He then looked at the event manager panel, barber shop and employee residence. The newly unlocked panel allowed him to easily organize and manage events at the inn, whether they were hosted by himself or his guests. After all, even common fast food restaurants hosted birthdays, why couldn't the inn? The organizing included setting up temporary venues that were much cheaper than establishing permanent buildings, hiring temporary staff, arranging prizes and many more features. The most important feature, to Lex at least, was the auto-run, which entailed that if Lex was too busy to personally oversee an event the system could manage the event based on a set template. As for the shop and residence, well the name was pretty clear on what they were and what function they performed. Since he had decided earlier that all his next expansions would be near one another, he placed the barber shop opposite the training room. It was a quaint little shop with a large window that let you see inside. A small red, white and blue barber shop pole was spinning next to the door which Lex found amusing. Inside on the left there were a few sofas for people to sit, on the right there were 3 barber chairs placed in front of full-size mirrors, and in the far end of the shop was the till. Originally that was all there was to it, but Lex had an idea and placed the employee residence right on top of the barber shop, with an entrance directly from the back of the shop. Technically, the employee residence was in a separate space and no one would enter it other than the employee, or anyone the employee invited in. However, Lex thought linking it to the shop and having it physically manifest here might not be a bad idea. It was just visualization, and he suspected Harry would like it. Though at the moment the residence was empty except for a bed, Harry would have to populate it with furniture himself using MP. Speaking of which, since Harry worked with guests directly, Lex did not need to pay him. Instead, 40% of whatever Harry charged his clients would go to Harry and the rest would go to Lex. "Welcome to your barber shop, Harry. What do you think?" The young man stood frozen at the entrance. A building appearing out of thin air surprised him, but it was being told that this shop was his that froze him. He had tears in his eyes and his mind had stopped working. Even though he was doing well on Earth, he couldn't even get a job as a barber until he got a barber's license, and now he had an entire store of his own. Before Lex could tease the young man, he realized some guests were about to enter the inn, so he left Harry to enjoy this moment on his own. Lex appeared in front of the inn just in time to see a young girl picking herself off the ground, rubbing her rear as if she had just been hit. Behind the girl stood a tall, mature lady who looked absolutely outraged. Lex noticed the two were wearing glasses with the Clark Kent effect, which would work on everyone else in the inn except him. He looked at their statuses before saying anything. Name, Christine Joel. Age, 99. Sex, female. Cultivation details, insufficient authority to view, cultivation sealed. Species, human. Midnight and prestige level, 1. Remarks, hello mama whistling noise. Name, Vera Joel. Age, 16. Sex, feel. Cultivation details. Foundation initial. Species, human. Midnight and prestige level, 1. Remarks, she has the aura of a new oracle, stay away. They are all scammers. Lex raised an eyebrow. There were multiple things in their status that caught his eye, yet it would be rude to keep his guests waiting. However, before he could say anything, the older lady waved her right hand, summoning what looked like a bathroom slipper. "I told you to behave," she roared as she threw the slipper, yet the young girl dodged effortlessly. "What's so good about behaving? I told you we should have run away with Dad, then we wouldn't be in this mess. Don't bring your no good father into this," she roared once as she began sprinting after her running daughter. Lex stood there frozen, unsure of how to respond. The mother and daughter pair were actually running in circles around, yelling at each other. Lex coughed loudly and used a bit of the power of the host attire to attract their attention. "Welcome guests to the Midnight Inn," he said, smiling warily. "Midnight? Such an ominous name," said the mother, who finally stopped. "It's not ominous, it's romantic," replied the daughter confidently. "Innkeeper, I would like to travel to a different planet. Any planet with a star-class civilization would do." Lex instantly froze when he heard what the mother and child were saying. They seemed to be familiar with the concept of the inn, but did not know the details. "If you want to travel to another world, you would need to increase your midnight in level to 3. Currently, you are at level 1, he told Vera. You can increase your prestige by spending a total of 100,000 MP at the inn. Please ignore her nonsense, Innkeeper. Her father has spoiled her silly," said the mother with an apologetic smile. "Haha, it's alright. I've heard oracles are mischievous, it must be tough on you." As soon as Lex said that, both the mother and daughter froze. Clearly that was supposed to be a secret. Lex was curious about what an oracle was. He could venture a guess based on the name, but it would be nice to know the details. Yet he couldn't ask directly, so he thought he'd stir the pot a little by mentioning it, but it seemed to have a different effect. The mother coughed as she straightened herself up and looked at the man in front of her as her daughter quickly stood behind her. She could not determine his cultivation, especially since hers was sealed, but based on what her daughter had read in the Book of Prophecies, he was not a simple man. She opened her mouth to say something, but before she could utter a word a bright light flashed, and a giant sleeping turtle appeared in the middle of the road. The three of them looked at the turtle, unsure of how to react. Lex recognized it from the horn on its head and checked its status. Name, not available. Age, 2017. Sex, male. Cultivation details, inner core. Species, galactic sovereign turtle, infant. Midnight and prestige level, 1. Remarks, it's a newborn baby, so get a babysitter. Lex stared at its age for a bit, trying to digest what he was seeing. But then, this was the cultivation world. He should get used to it. He used his suit's powers to gently lift the turtle and place it in the shade of a tree. "Please excuse the interruption, we receive all kinds of guests." Clearly, responded the mother, still looking at the turtle. Please excuse our earlier display. It was quite rude of us. No, not at all. Such a close family relationship is quite enviable. Would you like a tour of the inn? You seem to be familiar with some of it already. Yes, of course, that would be lovely. Lex was about to take them on a tour himself when he felt more guests entering the inn. This was quite a surprise. It was rare to have guests, let alone so many at the same time. Gerard, why don't you show our guests around, he said, summoning the old man. Gerard quickly led the mother and daughter duo not to the manor that was right in front of them, but to the golf cart nearby. It seemed he had discovered a passion. Just as the two left, a bright light shone, after which Will appeared at the inn along with Hugo, who still had a room rented, as well as 7 other guests. Welcome to the Midnight Inn, the old man said excitedly to his guests, who were looking at their new surroundings in alarm. Will, you seem to have stolen my life, Lex said, approaching the crowd with a smile. Will was the first person who had brought so many guests to him at once, which drastically improved his impression of the old man. Haha, my apologies, Innkeeper, I was too excited, said the old man, grinning like a child with his favorite toy. In that case, would you also like to give the tour to your guests as well? It would be my pleasure. With that, the man began leading his guests, as if he was extremely familiar with the place. Lex was amused at his expression and was about to return to the mother and daughter before he realized even more guests were on the way. What a busy day.